Chapter 131. She handed the box to Qin Ruoying as if she was presenting a treasure. She thought that Qin Ruoying would be very happy, but she didn't expect that after seeing the box, Qin Ruoying had a complicated expression on her face. She didn't understand, so he asked in confusion, "Ying, what's wrong? Are you unhappy?" Qin Ruoying didn't say anything, but her expression was also complicated. She thought she didn't understand the importance of this, so he explained, "The reason you can't sense qi is because when you became Xian Nu, they extracted your earthly soul. The person has 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. Without 1 spiritual soul, you can't be considered a complete person. It's because of this that you can't cultivate." Before she could finish, Qin Ruoying suddenly interrupted him. "I can choose not to cultivate." With that, Qin Ruoying hurriedly took Shi's hand and sighed softly, "Do you know what my wish was when I was 8 years old?" "The wish you made when you became Xian Nu?" "Yes, Xian Nu can make a wish. I didn't have the same ambition as Yuan Qing back then, so my wish was very simple. I only wanted to live a peaceful and happy life like a normal person." When she said this, she suddenly understood something. He looked at Qin Ruoying's serious expression and couldn't help but gently pull her into his arms. Then he said solemnly to her, "I'm sorry, Ying, I made you worry." She hadn't been injured in the battle with the Divine General. However, he had paid a heavy price because of this. Because he had burned another drop of essence blood. Essence blood, the essence of blood, was also the life source of a cultivator. Essence blood contained enormous energy. Many demonic and evil techniques even relied on stealing the essence blood of others to increase their own cultivation. She used a secret technique to burn his essence blood, allowing himself to explode with power close to his peak for a short period of time. This allowed him to successfully kill the Divine General, who was comparable to a complete Yuanying. Essence blood wasn't present at birth, but gradually condensed as a cultivator's cultivation grew. After 500 years of accumulation, she had actually only accumulated 3 drops of essence blood. Before returning to Earth, he had already burned a drop because he didn't have enough vital essence. The Divine General had burned another drop. Therefore, he only had 1 drop of essence blood left. If he lost even this drop of essence blood, Shi wouldn't be far from death. Regret? Absolutely not. Even if I die, my heart won't be covered in dust. Qin Ruoying looked at Shi's slightly pale face and couldn't help but reach out to touch it. After feeling the warmth from his face, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but murmur, "Maybe it's because of Xian Nu's identity that I've basically fulfilled all the wishes I've made before. Just think of it as greed, so I have a new wish." Speaking of this, Qin Ruoying suddenly laughed, then turned to look at the room. At this time, the little girl's giggles sounded in the room. "Silly child. Watching cartoons alone can make you convulse with laughter." After the Earth soul returned to its original position, Qin Xueqing really found the sense of qi. That kind of mysterious feeling made her, a martial arts fanatic, immediately intoxicated. Faintly, she even had an illusion. The long-sealed gate of the Alcade state seemed to finally show a sign of loosening. She could finally step into the Alcade state? Qin Wanqing was still struggling to break through to the Alcade realm. Qin Yongyan, on the other hand, started cultivating a few days earlier than her and took the spirit-gathering pill. Therefore, he smoothly stepped into the early stage of qi refinement and directly stepped into the Alcade realm. He was now a grandmaster of the Alcade state. This also made him more convinced that what Shi taught them was much more powerful than martial arts. His father-in-law and sister-in-law were both obsessed with cultivation, so they didn't even come out for dinner. She didn't want to interrupt this kind of state where they forgot to eat and sleep, so he left some food in the refrigerator for them. After dinner, Shi wanted Qin Ruoying to also cultivate. But at this time, Qin Ruoying shook her head and proposed to take a walk in Hohai. Take a walk? The little girl was lying on the bed. After hearing her mother's suggestion, she immediately raised her hands and feet, expressing her absolute approval. Being cooped up at home every day, this little girl was about to become moldy. In winter, the sun set early. It wasn't even 7 o'clock in the evening, but some places without street lights were already pitch black. Outside the big house, One could see the old street light at the entrance of Dongming Alley. The light of the street light was slightly yellow, elongating the shadows of the family of three. The little girl held Qin Ruing's left hand and Qin Shi's right hand. She squatted on the snow, and her two small cotton boots seemed to have turned into skis, constantly yelling for them to run. Just like the sleigh pulling the carriage at Christmas, her parents were the elk pulling the carriage. And she was Santa Claus bringing joy to the mortal world. Since their daughter had this request, her parents had to agree even if they had to work like cows or horses. Thus, Qin Ruing and Qin Shi looked at each other and smiled, and immediately pulled her to a trot. Giddy up, horse run, horse run. The sleigh started running, and the little girl's 2 feet immediately pulled a long track on the ground. She was so happy that she giggled, feeling that it seemed to be more interesting than riding a big cat. Qin Ruing's physical fitness was average. In winter, she wore a lot of clothes and the snow was difficult to walk on, so after running for a while, she was tired and panting. And because she was so happy, she kept laughing. The intense exercise and the stimulation of the cold air immediately caused a sharp pain in her abdomen. Exercise-induced abdominal pain. Ouch! Qin Ruing gasped for air as she clutched her stomach and groaned. Seeing this, Qin Shi quickly stopped. Qin Shi used his true essence to help her recuperate. After seeing that she was better, Qin Shi said to the little girl, "Mommy's body isn't good. Nian Nian, come, Daddy will play with you. Today, I'll let you experience what it means to be fast and furious." But after Qin Ruing stopped, the little girl sat down on the ground. Hearing Qin Shi's words, she immediately stretched out her hands and took Qin Shi's right hand. "Little princess, let's go." After that, Qin Shi started running. In this kind of snow, they couldn't run too fast. If the little girl couldn't control herself, she would be dragged to the ground by Qin Shi. Therefore, Qin Shi could only pay attention to the little girl's state while slowly speeding up. In fact, the speed was not very fast, but the little girl was very excited. She happily giggled and said, "Papa, come on. Papa, come on." It was really much more fun than riding a big cat. Hohai had not completely frozen, and the skating rink had not been opened, so now Shikahai looked a little deserted. The weather was still too cold, so the family of three returned home after a round. In the evening, after the little girl fell asleep, Qin Ruing finally began to cultivate. She had figured it out. If she neglected her daughter because of cultivation, then she was not worthy of being Nian Nian's mother. In a dark room, the little girl fell asleep sweetly, while Qin Shi and Qin Ruing sat cross-legged on her left and right. Suddenly, Qin Shi opened his eyes. Chapter 132. Outside the house, the cold wind was whistling. The big pit that Qin Shi had stepped on had been covered with a shallow layer of snow. The blue stone floor was broken into pieces, protruding in the east and concave in the west. There were thousands of gullies, and if one was not careful, one would slide down. Seeing that the little fellow's activity area was suddenly missing such a large area because of him, Qin Shi thought that he should find someone to repair it tomorrow, so that the little fellow could continue to gallop in the yard. Perhaps, he could also buy her a set of children's outdoor expansion equipment. Just like the large-scale expansion equipment in the shopping mall, there were tire arrays, rock climbing, balance boards, ring bridges, scaling ladders, and so on. It was very playable and could also be used to train the little fellow's balance, athletic ability, coordination ability, and many other aspects. Qin Shi did not consider letting the little fellow cultivate for the time being. That was because Nian Nian still had to go to school in the future. At that time, she would definitely play with other children in school. If she lost control a little and slapped other children, it would be troublesome. Therefore, it would not be too late to teach her cultivation when she was a little more sensible. While thinking, Qin Shi flew out of the yard. He wanted to go out and find another place to cultivate. Although the spiritual energy of heaven and earth near Shikahai was very rich, now his wife, sister-in-law, and father-in-law were all cultivating here. The cultivation of the three of them was still shallow, so it didn't matter if they were crowded together. However, Qin Shi's cultivation was too high, so he must not stay with them. Because once he started cultivating, he would immediately form a spiritual energy black hole in the courtyard, sucking all the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby into his body. How could others cultivate like this? Therefore, Chen Shi could only come out and find another place. Since returning to earth, Chen Shi had never deliberately wanted to cultivate. The reason why he changed his mind now was that after the battle with the divine general, he suddenly had a sense of crisis. If he began to wholeheartedly restore his cultivation after returning to earth, why would he waste a drop of blood essence today? Strength was the basic guarantee of a happy life. In order to make his happy life last longer, Chen Shi decided to start cultivating seriously. In the past, he had nothing to live for, but now he was full of happiness, so his fighting spirit was high. If he wanted to cultivate, he had to first find a suitable blessed enclave. Blessed enclaves were usually located in places where there were very few people. For example, in the mountains and on the islands, it was very easy for blessed lands to appear. The so-called blessed enclave was actually a place with dense heaven and earth spirit qi. As the capital of the country, Shangjing's geographical location was excellent. It was located at the intersection of the plains and the mountains. The steep mountains, the rushing rivers, and the fertile plains were all in one place. It was a treasure trove of wind and water. It was also the best place to build the capital. There were 2 mountain ranges in the vicinity. The Taihang mountain range ran from the north to the south, and was majestic. The Yan mountain range ran from the west to the east, and was vast and boundless. To the west was Taihang mountain, and to the north was Mount Yan. Mount Yan was still a bit small and not grand enough, so Chen Shi thought for a moment and directly eliminated Mount Yan. Now that the tourism industry was developed, places with slightly better scenery were all listed as scenic spots. It was estimated that when the big cat was looking for a place to cultivate, it also took a lot of effort to find Mount Amei. Chen Shi flew and searched. It wasn't until he flew over the Spirit Mountain in the western suburbs of Shangjing that he finally found a remote place with dense heaven and earth spirit qi. This mountain range was steep, and it was estimated to be more than 2,000 meters above sea level. The top of the mountain was already covered with a thick layer of snow. Standing on the top of the mountain, when the clouds surged, the clouds paved a road, and people walked in the sky. It was like a fairyland. Chen Shi looked around, and after confirming that there was no one else around, he sat cross-legged on a large rock at the top of the mountain and began cultivating. As he gradually entered the state, Chen Shi's body seemed to turn into a black hole, and the surrounding heaven and earth spirit qi rushed towards him. Within a radius of tens of meters, there was strangely no wind, like a color photo, and everything seemed to be still. On the top of the snowy mountain, a bright moon hung in the sky, and the surrounding stars were overshadowed. Time flew. When Chen Shi opened his eyes again, the sun on the horizon just happened to show a corner of the clouds. Thousands of clusters of golden arrows burst out from the clouds and reflected on his body, as if covering him with a golden gauze. Cultivation was dry and boring to begin with, because it was a process that accumulated over time. Chen Shi was not in a hurry. After seeing the sun rise, he immediately got up and left the top of the mountain, because he had to go back to prepare breakfast for the little fellow. Qin Ruing now also made up her mind to accompany Nian Yan during the day and find time to cultivate at night. She wanted to let the little fellow deeply feel what was called motherly love. Of course, this kind of love was not without limits. Appropriate love was called doting. Once it went beyond the limit, it became doting. To any child, being spoiled was definitely not beneficial. Qin Ruing also put in a lot of effort. Although she had only been with Nian Yan for a few days, she was very keen to find a problem that had not yet occurred. Nian Yan was very smart and sensible, and she rarely lost her temper. Although sometimes she also liked to make trouble, more often than not, Nian Yan liked to quietly watch cartoons with the big cat. Nian Yan never seemed to be very interested in the outside world. Playing games with her parents, watching cartoons with the big cat. This was all the content of her life. This way of life was absolutely wrong, because she lacked communication with her peers, and also relatively lacked the psychological and ability to socialize. Although the big cat was a monster, and its intelligence was far superior to that of a child, it could not speak, so there was no way to communicate with the little fellow. If the child had too little contact with the outside world from a young age, it may lead to an extremely serious consequence. That was, when the child grew up, he or she would become more and more withdrawn. If it was more serious, it would even evolve into a psychological illness, such as low self-esteem, autism, depression, and so on. As a parent, in the child's growth process, it was obvious that they should take the initiative to create opportunities for the child to interact with strangers and unfamiliar environments, to increase the child's ability to socialize and adapt to the environment, and to cultivate a cheerful and optimistic character. Chin Roying looked at the little fellow who immediately climbed into bed after breakfast. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong, so she quickly told this problem to Chin Shi. And when Chin Shi heard what she said, he immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. After all, Aunt Zhang was old and in poor health, so she rarely took Nian Nian out to play with other children. And after he came back, it seemed that he did not take Nian Nian to play with other children. At most, he let the little fellow go to kindergarten, but after a few days, he did not go. No. According to this progress, it seemed that Nian Nian was likely to become more and more withdrawn. She looked very outgoing now, but that was because she stayed by her parents' side all day long. She could not be so introverted in front of her parents, right? What to do? Chapter 133. Walking side by side with me is obviously a tough task for a loner like him. The man in the condom. Humans were social creatures. Some Western scholars even categorized loners who do not socialize with others as antisocial personalities, because this in itself was a sign of morbidity. Being antisocial was different from being alone. Lonely people yearned to socialize with others. They would not be bored with anyone, and they would not even be on guard against everyone. Antisocial people were a kind of personality defect. They usually thought highly of themselves and looked down on others, but their hearts were extremely weak. They were afraid of being stabbed, so they did not want to socialize with others. When they had to socialize with others, antisocial people would also appear to behave strangely, and pretentiously. They always gave people a feeling of nervousness. They were actually very pitiful. They did not necessarily have antisocial psychology or violent tendencies, but they definitely felt autistic, lost, inferior, nervous, and depressed. They were unable to communicate with others normally, which made them prefer to be alone and live in isolation from others. There were not many congenital factors for the formation of antisocial personality. It was mainly due to the negative influence of various subjective and objective environments, which caused the psychological distortion caused by long-term depression. For example, if Nian Nian continued like this, when she went to primary school in the future, it was likely that she would be ostracized by her classmates because she did not learn to communicate with her peers. She would be treated as an anomaly by her classmates. A little girl who only knew how to chat with cats all day. Was that not weird enough? The results of the survey showed that about 5% to 8% of the children in primary and secondary school groups would be antisocial. And this was already an extremely exaggerated number. Out of 20 people, there would be one antisocial individual. The class was a group, and antisocial children were always unable to integrate into this group. As a result, they were more likely to be ridiculed, ostracized, and criticized by their classmates. This situation would gradually decrease as the child grew older. However, this process was incomparably long for those pitiful children who were reclusive and eccentric. They would endure all kinds of psychological pressure, but in the end, they would only become a stepping stone in the growth process of others. Many years later, who would remember the freak who was ridiculed and teased in the class? Who would care if that freak was doing well now? Chin Shi panicked. After all, he really couldn't cure mental illness. After some serious consideration, he quickly discussed with Chin Rung, how about sending Nian Nian to kindergarten? Hearing this, Chin Roying immediately nodded. She happened to have the same idea. Although Chin Roying wanted to spend more time with Nian Nian, in order to give Nian Nian a healthy and happy environment, it was better to be cautious. As long as it involved their children, any parent would become particularly worried. Even if there was only the slightest possibility, they had to eliminate that possibility in time. The couple reached a consensus. Thus, she sat beside the little fellow. Nyan, Daddy wants to discuss something with you, okay? The little fellow was busy watching cartoons. When she walked over, he happened to block her line of sight. After a hum, she directly lay on her side on the bed and continued to watch cartoons. Seeing this, she pretended to be serious and said, Nyan, Daddy is talking to you. The little fellow's eyes were full of doubts. After glancing at she muttered, Papa, you're blocking me. Daddy is talking to you. Pause first or Daddy will be angry. Oh. She obviously had some weight in the little fellow's heart. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, she obediently took the remote control and pressed the pause button. Then, she sat up very obediently. Say it, Papa. Seeing that the little fellow was so obedient, she nodded very satisfactorily. Then, he gently held her in his arms and asked seriously, Nyan, do you want to go to kindergarten? However, when the little fellow heard his question, he didn't even think about it and immediately shook his little head like a rattledrum. I don't want to go to kindergarten. This was obviously out of Chinshi's expectation, so he quickly asked, Why? Didn't you like kindergarten before? Hearing this, the little fellow pouted and replied loudly, I don't like kindergarten. Perhaps to express her attitude, the little fellow even repeated, I don't like kindergarten. I don't like it. She didn't play her cards according to common sense, and Chinshi was confused. In the past, she clearly wanted to go to kindergarten, but now she suddenly didn't want to go. She changed her mind too quickly. She had no choice but to patiently persuade her, Nyan, kindergarten is very fun. The teachers teach you to draw, put on little red flowers for you, and classmates play games with you. Why don't you want to go? Hearing Chinshi's words, the little fellow instantly exploded. She didn't know why she suddenly became muddle-headed. After pushing Chinshi's arm away, she lay on the bed and rolled left and right, constantly muttering, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't like kindergarten. Chinshi was stunned. When did Nyan become like this? She was simply a naughty child. Was there really a problem with his teaching methods? He still remembered that when he first came back, Nyan was very obedient and sensible. How long had he been taking care of Nyan? How did he raise the child like this? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but fall into deep reflection. Seeing that the little fellow had flipped out, Qin Ruing also sat next to her. After gently helping the little fellow up, she patiently asked, Nyan, can you tell us why you don't want to go to kindergarten? After hearing this question, the little fellow was stunned for a moment. But right after that, she burst into tears. This time, Qin Ruing also panicked. She quickly took her into her arms and comforted her softly. Nyan, don't cry. If you don't want to go, we won't force you. But you have to tell us why you don't want to go, right? The little fellow cried miserably. Seeing this, she hurriedly went to the bathroom and brought her a hot towel. The husband and wife worked together and spent a great deal of effort to stop the little fellow from crying. After a while, the little fellow sobbed, pursed her lips, and said very sadly, I don't want to go to kindergarten. I want to be with Papa and Mama. Hearing this, Qin Ruing couldn't help but look at Chinshi and instantly understood the reason. This poor child, she was raised by Aunt Zhang alone before, and her parents were never by her side. Therefore, when the little fellow had her parents again, she didn't want to be separated from them for a moment. And this was obviously the root cause of her recent muddle-headedness. Since the child said so, it was obvious that she couldn't go to kindergarten. Qin Ruing held Nyan in her arms and thought for a while. Suddenly, she said to Chinshi, how about we change the way? Look at the cold weather, there aren't many parents who would bring their children out to play. Nyan doesn't want to go to kindergarten. It's definitely not a way to go on. How about this? Let's open a bookstore or a restaurant or a coffee shop so that Nyan can meet many strangers. Chapter 134. Open a shop? This idea seems to be good. Of course, if it was other seasons, there would be no need to go through so much trouble. He could just take Nyan out to Hohai every day. Over time, she would naturally meet some new friends. But unfortunately, it was winter now, and it was winter in the north. The temperature was low and the wind was strong. Before the ice skating rink was officially opened, the popularity of Shikahai during the day was very bleak. Of course, the so-called bleak popularity refers to the daytime. Hohai was really lively at night. If Sanliton's bar street was trendy, then Hohai's bar street would undoubtedly be artistic. A small alley near the sea. There was no noisy music. The melodious singing coupled with the unique charm of the old Shangjing was definitely a melodious elegy in the modern city. It was really good to open a shop in this kind of artistic and fresh place. Anyway, they were idle all day. Opening a shop to take care of the little guy could also add some fun to their life. Thinking about it, it was also quite good. But the question was, what kind of shop should they open? She didn't have any ideas. Since it was Qin Ruing's suggestion, he might as well listen to her opinion. So he smiled and asked, "What kind of shop do you want to open?" Hearing this, Qin Ruing frowned and pondered. They weren't short of money. Opening a shop was purely for fun and to create a new living environment for the little guy. The business couldn't be too good. If it was too good, they wouldn't have time to take care of the child. But it couldn't be too bad. If it was too bad, they could only stare blankly at the door all day. It was better not to open. After thinking for a while, Qin Ruing couldn't think of a reason, so she proposed to go out and look at the shops around. Hohai Bar Street was formed after the end of the SARS, more than 10 years ago at an incomprehensible speed. She still vaguely remembered that there were only a few small pubs here before. But now, looking around, Hohai was densely packed with small pubs on both sides. The family of 3 walked around Hohai. The more Qin Ruing looked, the more dissatisfied she was. She saw this, but he didn't say anything. When the little fellow ran to the railing and checked whether the lake water was frozen, she suddenly smiled and said, "Ying, we only opened the shop to let Nyen come into contact with more people. As for what kind of shop we open, it doesn't really matter." Hearing this, Qin Ruing couldn't help but be stunned. After carefully thinking about Shi's words, she said with some hesitation, "I was wrong. Most of the places here are bars. It's really not suitable to open a bookstore." In fact, Qin Ruing wanted to open a bookstore the most. However, Hohai was still a relatively mature business circle. Hohai Bar Street's reputation was comparable to Sanliton and Workers' Sports Complex. Therefore, other than bars, there were only a few tea houses, restaurants, food stalls, and so on. There weren't even many supermarkets. Fame had already determined that other shops couldn't survive here. Therefore, Qin Ruing thought for a long time, but still couldn't think of what kind of shop they should open. She saw her hesitation and suggested with a smile, "Didn't you see a tea house with a shop for sale sign outside? How about we take it over?" Tea house? Qin Ruing was a bit surprised, but after seeing Shi's serious expression, she had to seriously consider this proposal. In fact, compared to a tea house, Qin Ruing was more inclined to a coffee shop. But unfortunately, coffee was a Western culture. Therefore, after coming to Hohai, a place with a strong folkloric flavor, it was somewhat unsuitable. When they were walking along the road, they already saw several closed coffee shops. Huaxia had a tea culture since ancient times. Tea was popular in the Tang dynasty and flourished in the Song dynasty. From the emperor, to the literati, to the common people, there was no one who didn't like tea. In the eyes of many young people, the style of coffee seemed to be much higher than tea. But in fact, coffee, cocoa, and tea were known as the 3 non-alcoholic drinks in the world. Silk, porcelain, and tea, these were also the business cards that Huaxia handed to the world. Before the bar street in Hohai rose, there were many tea houses here. Every summer, Hohai Lake was wide, the water was sparkling, willows were hanging on both sides of the lake, lights were shining, and the palace walls and minarets in the distance were reflected in the water. From time to time, there were pleasure boats gently rowing. If at this time, there was a pot of good tea, sitting quietly by the lake and carefully tasting it, wouldn't it be pleasant? This was a kind of cultural charm, belonging to Huaxia, and also belonging to Hohai. Qin Ruing was moved. Therefore, the couple immediately reached an agreement, called the little girl, and turned to the tea house with a shop for sale sign. The owner was a middle-aged man in his 40s. After hearing Chen Shi's intention, he immediately enthusiastically introduced the tea house to them. The size of the tea house was not bad. The lobby was about 70 to 80 square meters, and there was a small courtyard of more than 50 square meters in the back. The overall decoration was very antique, exquisite, and elegant. The shop was the owner's own. Because the business of the tea house was not very good, the owner did not intend to continue to operate, and was ready to rent out the shop to collect rent. The price of a shop in Hohai was not cheap. The better location of the shop, the rent for 1 square meter fluctuated around 300 yuan. In other words, such a large shop, the monthly rent would be at least 40,000 yuan. In a year, the rent alone was close to 500,000 yuan. It was really like an inch of land was worth an inch of gold. Because the owner was the landlord, the transfer fee was saved, but the renovation fee still had to be paid. Chen Shi had a lot of money, but he did not want to be a sucker, so he negotiated the price with the owner. After some bargaining, the owner agreed to only charge 200,000 yuan for the renovation fee. The stock in the shop would be calculated separately, and the rent would be 35,000 a month, paid once a year, plus a month's deposit. In order to prevent Chen Shi from saying that he was randomly charging the renovation fee, the owner even took out his previous renovation fee list, repeatedly saying that he spent 500,000 to renovate the shop, and if Chen Shi rented it to someone else, he would receive 400,000 just for the transfer fee. Although he said so, it was up to Chen Shi whether he believed it or not. After all, this was not a small matter, so the owner thought that the young couple would go back to discuss it. But what he did not expect was that the young couple did not hesitate for long. The two simply discussed a few words, and directly decided to rent. The price was agreed, then the next step was simple: look at the property certificate, sign the contract, clear the account, check the goods, pay the money, and a happy cooperation. The transfer of a shop was actually a very troublesome matter. If you want to change the name of the shop, or change the type of business, then you have to let the owner go to the Trade and Commerce Bureau to cancel the original business license, and then Chen Shi would go to register again. Chen Shi found it troublesome, so he was too lazy to even change the name. Seeing that he was so straightforward, the owner signed an agreement with him, and then handed over the original business license to him. Therefore, in less than a day, this tea house, which was not far from Dongming Alley and adjacent to Hohai, had completely changed owners. Qingyi Tea House. This was the new business of the family of 3. While Chen Shi was signing the contract with the owner, the little girl took the big cat to wander around the tea house, from time to time touching here and there, as if she was very interested in this place. When Qin Ring saw her like this, her heart immediately felt relieved. Chapter 135. The next day, the little fellow was woken up by the sound of bricks colliding. She opened her eyes in a daze, climbed to the window, and found that a group of strangers were moving bluestones into the yard. Chen Shi stood in the yard and directed the workers. When Qin Ring saw the little fellow get up, she immediately came to her and prepared to help her get up. "Mama, what are they doing?" "The yard is broken. Papa asked someone to repair it. After that, you can play in the yard again. Papa is so nice." Hearing this, Qin Ring immediately pinched her little face and asked, "What about Mama?" "Mama is so nice." The little fellow flattered, and Qin Ring immediately laughed. After gently picking up the little fellow from the bed, she smiled and said, "Let's go. Mama will take you to wash up." But to repair the yard, first of all, the broken bluestone slabs had to be swept out, and then the mud from outside to fill the big hole. After that, the bluestone slabs could be laid again. The workers made a lot of noise. Qin Xueqing frowned and came out to take a look. Then she slammed the door and went back to the east wing. Recently, she and Qin Yongyan had been completely obsessed with cultivation. They often didn't even go out for a whole day. Chen Shi didn't ask them to eat now. Anyway, after the family of 3 had eaten, Chen Shi would put all the leftovers into the insulated cabinet. When Qin Xueqing and Qin Yongyan were hungry, they naturally knew to eat by themselves. After breakfast, Chen Shi briefly explained to the person in charge of the decoration company that they must finish the work today. After that, the family of 3 went out. The original owner of the tea house was a very particular person. When he left yesterday, he had carefully cleaned the tea house. After a brief check, Chin-shi took out a sign from the bar and hung it outside the door. It was open. He didn't even change the sign. He didn't know if there would be any old customers. Chen-shi sat at the bar and seriously warned the little girl to be sweet and polite, and to take the initiative to greet the guests when they came in. After the little fellow listened to his incessant warning, she nodded her little head numbly. It was unknown whether she understood or not. Chin-shi had already seen the boss's account book before, and the business was indeed not good. Because it was winter, there was basically no business in the tea house in the morning. It was only slightly better in the afternoon. Many customers who came to the bar because of its reputation would sit in the tea house with their friends for a while, chatting and playing cards before the bar opened. The tea house was open, and even the signboard was still the same. However, Chin-shi had overlooked a very important issue. That was, opening a tea house required a certain amount of connections. The tea house itself was a business of acquaintances, and the gathering and dispersing of chi were closely related to the boss. A successful tea house must have a boss who could be called a social expert. The customers came for the boss, but they also dispersed because of the boss. Therefore, there was a saying often heard in the tea houses that business was good as long as the boss was there. If the boss was not there, there would be no ghosts. On the right side of the lobby, there was a bookshelf next to the window seat, on which were some of the world's classics that the former boss had bought before. Qin Ruing casually flipped through, then picked up a book called Love in the Time of Cholera, and sat in the booth to read it. Seeing this, Chen-shi poured a cup of tea and asked the little fellow to bring it to her. Nyan, come, bring a cup of tea to mommy. Be careful, don't burn yourself. In order to make it convenient for the little fellow to take, Chen-shi specially chose a hand cup and only mixed 2/3 of the water. The little fellow held the cup with both hands and walked very slowly. When she carefully came to Qin Ruing's side, she sweetly shouted, "Mommy, drink tea." Qin Ruing read carefully, so when the little fellow called her, she found that the little fellow was still holding the teacup, so she quickly took the teacup from the little fellow's hand, and at the same time did not forget to praise, "Ah, Nyan is so good." The little fellow was happy and seemed to think that it was a very pleasant thing to serve tea to others, so she immediately turned and ran to the bar, looked up at Chen-shi and asked, "Papa, when will the guest come?" Don't worry, take your time. The most important thing to do business is to be patient." Chen-shi smiled and held her in his arms, and then the father and daughter sat behind the bar and chatted. The door opened at 9 o'clock in the morning. After waiting for 2 hours in boredom, the family of 3 finally welcomed their first guest after the opening. To Chen-shi's surprise, the guest did not belong to the middle-aged group, but was a young girl. The girl stood outside the door and hesitated for a moment. After looking at the business sign outside the door, she pushed the door and walked in. She wasn't very old and looked to be about 20 years old. She should be at the age of a down jacket and jeans, but now she was wearing a long coat that did not match her temperament at all, and a combination of pantyhose and boots on the lower half of her body. The girl had put on makeup. Perhaps it was due to her poor technique, but her makeup gave off a strange feeling. Obviously, she was a natural hibiscus, but she had to paint a snake with legs and dress herself up a little. Of course, it would make people feel a little strange. The girl entered the tea house, looked around, and saw that the right side of the booth was already occupied, so she went directly to the left side of the lobby by the window. Seeing this, Chen-shi quickly patted the little fellow, indicating that it was time for her to receive the guest. They opened the shop to train the little fellow's social skills. If the little fellow did not perform well, then it would not be too late for him to come forward. Both parents were here, so the little fellow did not seem to be afraid of strangers. After receiving Chen-shi's signal, she ran over. "Sister, what do you want to drink?" Looking at the 4 or 5-year-old little girl in front of her, Xiao Yuan could not help but be stunned. This tea house was really strange. The waiter was actually an innocent and lovely child. Seeing that she did not speak, the little fellow thought that she did not hear her, so she asked sweetly again, "Sister, what do you want to drink?" "Papa said that we have everything here." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help laughing, and her mood became much better. After glancing at the price list on the table, Qiao Yuan smiled at the little fellow and said, "Then black tea, thank you." Okay. The little fellow nodded blankly, as if she did not understand what black tea was. But that was not important. What was important was that they had a guest. So, the little fellow immediately turned around and ran back, shouting excitedly as she ran, "Papa! Sister wants black tea. Black tea." The little fellow's voice was very loud and sounded very excited. Even Qin Ruing was startled by her. "Okay, I got it." Chen Shi smiled and patted the little fellow's head, then took out a packet of Kimun black tea from behind the bar counter. Because she was the first customer after the opening, Chen Shi injected a trace of spiritual energy into the tea when he made it. Qiao Yuan would never have dreamed that she would be able to win the first prize by randomly finding a tea house before going to work. "Sister, drink tea." The little fellow's little mouth was very sweet, and her cute appearance was enough to make people melt, so Qiao Yuan was instantly captivated by her. Qiao Yuan hesitated for a moment, then quickly took out her phone and asked Chen Shi behind the bar counter, "Boss, can I take a photo with your daughter?" Chen Shi nodded and smiled, "As long as she agrees." Seeing that she was so popular, the little fellow was so happy that she could not close her mouth. After taking a photo with Qiao Yuan, the little fellow ran back to Chen Shi's side, a little embarrassed. Then she burrowed into his arms, rubbing left and right and acting coquettishly. Seeing the little fellow's proud look, Chen Shi could not help but nod in satisfaction. Opening a shop allowed the little fellow to interact with strangers, and also allowed her to gain recognition through her performance. Chapter 136. After Qiao Yuan came, 3 more guests came one after another. They were all middle-aged, and it was obvious that they were regulars in the tea house. The 3 of them joked as they pushed open the door of the tea house, but after entering, they couldn't help but be stunned. One of them looked around the lobby with some doubts. After making sure that he didn't go in the wrong way, he looked at Chen Shi behind the bar and asked, "Where's old Sue?" Hearing this, Chen Shi explained with a smile, "This shop has been transferred. I'm the new owner here. Do you need anything?" "Oh," the man frowned and nodded, then turned to discuss with his companions. After the 3 of them whispered a few words, the one who spoke before said to Chen Shi, "3 cups of plain tea." "Okay, please sit wherever you want." After that, they walked directly to the booth behind Qin Ruing, as if they were very familiar with this place. After seeing them come over, Qin Ruing hesitated for a moment, then took the book back to the bar. After all, she was the lady boss. It was not good to always occupy the best seat. Chen Shi took out 3 cups from the cabinet. The little girl reached out to take it, but Chen Shi hurriedly stopped her and said with a smile, "Don't worry, you can't take 3 cups. Daddy will help you." "Okay." The little girl took back her little hand and nodded obediently. After Chen Shi handed the cup to her, the little girl carefully followed behind Chen Shi with the cup and walked toward the 3 people. "Oh boss, is this your daughter?" "Well, yes." "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Seeing the little girl eagerly following behind Chen Shi, the person who spoke just now couldn't help but exclaim, "Your daughter is so cute, she's exactly the same as my little one when she was young." Chen Shi smiled very politely, then patted the little girl's head and said to her, "Nyan, uncle is praising you. You're cute, quickly say thank you to uncle." Hearing this, the little girl said sweetly, "Thank you, uncle." "Oh, your child is so cute." "That's right, why didn't my wife give me a daughter back then?" "Come on, with your shabby appearance, how could you give birth to such a beautiful daughter?" "In my opinion, if your wife had really given birth to such a beautiful daughter for you, I'm afraid you would have taken her for a paternity test long ago." "Bah, you can't spit out ivory from your dog mouth." The 3 of them seemed to have a good relationship with each other. Chen Shi stood to the side and listened for a while, then said with a smile, "Please sit down. If there's anything you need, just tell me." "'Kay boss, you don't mind us." A Happy's family was always eye-catching. Therefore, Qiao Yuan had been secretly sizing up the family of 3 sitting behind the bar. The boss was handsome, and the lady boss was beautiful and virtuous. They didn't seem to lack money at all, and most importantly, they had a well-behaved and sensible child. Thinking about it, Qiao Yuan couldn't help but have a trace of envy in her eyes. Perhaps she realized that she had lost her composure, but when she saw Chen Shi look in her direction, Qiao Yuan immediately lowered her head, then picked up the black tea on the table and drank it. The black tea entered her mouth, and the taste was mellow. But when it slowly seeped into her throat, Qiao Yuan faintly felt that there was a delicate fragrance going from her throat to her stomach. The taste was extremely mellow, fragrant, and sweet, which was simply intoxicating. After tasting it carefully, Qiao Yuan felt that her whole person was much more awake, and there was a sudden feeling of enlightenment in front of her. She held the cup in front of her and carefully studied the black tea. What kind of tea is this? Why is it so delicious? It seems to have the effect of refreshing the mind. Qiao Yuan took another sip, and after tasting it carefully, she suddenly thought of something and quickly looked at the price list on the table. This cup of tea is so delicious, it must be very expensive, right? Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had just looked at the price list, and if she remembered correctly, the cost here wasn't very high. However, the taste of this cup of tea made Qiao Yuan suspect that she had just seen wrongly, so she quickly picked up the price list and carefully looked at it. The cheapest was the vegetarian tea, 20 yuan per cup. Bilyuakun, 28 yuan per cup. Kimun black tea, 38 yuan per cup. And the most expensive Wuida Hong Pao, only 68 yuan per cup. 38 yuan? A cup of caramel macchiato at Starbucks cost more than 30 yuan, and such a mellow black tea only cost 38 yuan? For some reason, Qiao Yuan felt like she had picked up a bargain. If Chen Shi knew what she was thinking now, he would probably be unable to help but chuckle. The tea leaves of this kind of tea house were usually bought wholesale from the tea market, one bag at a time. A bag of 500 grams and a cup of 20 kilograms. Each cup of tea only required about 3 to 4 grams of tea leaves, and some people had a strong taste, so they put more than 10 grams of tea leaves. On average, one bag of tea leaves could make at least 100 cups of tea. Of course, this didn't mean that the tea house was a profiteering industry. After a little careful calculation, one would know that this tea house was definitely a loss-making business. The profits were high, but the corresponding rent, water, and electricity were also very expensive. The rent here was 35,000 yuan. How many cups of tea would it take to earn that much? Moreover, customers could sit here for a whole day after ordering a cup of tea. The tea house was only so big, so even if the business was booming, there was no way to receive more customers after it was full. Qiao Yuan was still savoring the taste of the black tea when her phone suddenly rang. Qiao Yuan quickly picked up the phone, and a man's voice sounded on the other end. Qiao, you're in luck today. The bill is issued before noon. Come quickly, you can still get lunch, and okay, I'll be right there. After hanging up the phone, Qiao Yuan shouted to Chen Shi, "Boss, the bill." Hearing this, Chen Shi immediately patted the little girl and said with a smile, "Nian Nian, go collect the money, 38 yuan, remember to count it." The little girl thought for a moment and nodded. Then she jumped down from Qin Ruing's arms and ran directly to Qiao Yuan. She imitated Chen Shi and said, "Sister, 38 yuan." Qiao Yuan took out 2 20s and handed them directly to the little girl when she came over. The little girl took the money and then ran back to the bar. Papa here. Seeing this, Chen Shi and Qin Ruing couldn't help looking at each other, and both of them laughed. The child didn't know how to add and subtract. It was simply deliberately making things difficult for her to count the money. Sister gave too much money, so we have to give her change. Come on, Tinyan, give these 2 yuan to sister. The little girl was a little confused. However, after hearing Chen Shi's words, she obediently took the 2 yuan and then ran quickly to Qiao Yuan. At this time, Qiao Yuan had already gotten up and was ready to go out. She seemed to have forgotten that the boss should give her change of 2 yuan. Seeing that she was about to push the door open and leave, the little girl hurriedly shouted, "Sister, your money!" As she spoke, the little girl waved the money in her hand and ran excitedly to Qiao Yuan's side. Qiao Yuan raised her head and handed the 2 yuan to her. Qiao Yuan stopped and turned to take the 2 yuan in the little girl's hand. She touched her head and said with a smile, "Thank you, sister. Can you tell me your name?" "My name is Chen Yen." "Sister, You can call me Nian Nian. After that, the little girl immediately ran back to the bar, seeming a little embarrassed. Goodbye, Nian Nian. I'll come to see you tomorrow. Qiao Yuan smiled and shouted at the little girl's back. The little girl didn't look back, so she looked at the couple behind the bar and politely waved to them before leaving. Seeing this, Chen Shi smiled at her in response. Qiao Yuan left. Chapter 137. Lin Xian? Qin Ruing hadn't seen Lin Xian for many years, so her impression of Lin Xian was still in college. However, Chen Shi's memory of Lin Xian was not long ago. The cruise ship, the dock, the palm trees. On that sunny afternoon, Lin Xian stood under the shade of the tree and watched the father and daughter get into the car and leave. She stood there for a long time. In fact, the Lin Xian of the past was quite similar to the girl just now. A girl from a small county came to Zhonghai, an international first-tier city, to study and work. At that time, Lin Xian had a kind of maturity that was incompatible with her peers. Of course, that so-called maturity, in retrospect, was also a kind of childishness. When all the impurities were washed away, the girl just now might become like Lin Xian now. Chen Shi thought about something thoughtfully. Qin Ruing glanced at Chen Shi and suddenly asked with a smile, "What? Have you met Lin Xian?" Hearing this, Chen Shi immediately nodded and replied, "Yes, when I first came back, I asked her about you. When Fang Lei got married, she asked Nian Nian to be her flower girl." Fang Lei is married? Thinking about it carefully, I haven't seen them in a long time. Do you think we should go back to Zhonghai to meet them? When do you want to go? Qin Ruing thought for a moment, looked down at the little girl in her arms, and said, "Let's talk about it next spring. The weather is cold, I don't want to go." Chen Shi nodded, but then he suddenly thought of something and quickly took out his phone. "Oh, I almost forgot. Your back is such a big thing, we should tell Auntie Zhang the good news first." While speaking, Chen Shi opened WeChat. After sending a video call request to Auntie Zhang, Chen Shi handed the phone to Qin Ru. Qin Ruing paused for a moment and quickly took the phone. The video call request rang a few times, then it went through with a beep. Auntie Zhang seemed to be busy with something. The screen showed the ceiling of her house. After she accepted the video call, she probably put the phone on the table. "Yo, stinky brat, you finally remembered to give this old woman a call?" Auntie Zhang's granddaughter was crying. She was so busy comforting her granddaughter that she didn't have time to look at the phone. Qin Ruing looked at the screen. She didn't see Auntie Zhang, so she hesitated for a moment before saying gently, "Auntie, it's me, Ing." Auntie was stunned. Then, he grabbed the phone on the table and shouted at the camera with a surprised face, "Oh my God! Ing, when did you come back?" Seeing that familiar face, Qin Ruing was also slightly excited. She quickly replied, "I just came back a few days ago. I'm discussing with Chen Shi when to go to Chengdu to visit you." "Thank God, you're finally back. Where are Chen Shi and Nian Nian?" Come, let me see your family." Hearing Auntie Zhang's request, Qin Ruing raised the phone high and then asked Chen Shi and the little girl to come over. In the video, Qin Ruing leaned close to Chen Shi, and Chen Shi held the little girl in his arms. Both of them looked at her with a smile. The little girl poked her head out and saw Auntie Zhang in the video. She immediately shouted excitedly, "Grandma! Grandma!" As she shouted, she waved her little hand and motioned for Auntie Zhang to look at her. "Io, your family is finally reunited." Looking at the family of three in the video, Auntie Zhang's words were also quite emotional. After so many twists and turns, they were finally reunited. Qin Ruing and Auntie Zhang talked about old times, and Chen Shi held the little girl and listened with a smile. The two of them chatted for more than half an hour. When Auntie Zhang had to prepare lunch for her granddaughter, Qin Ruing reluctantly said goodbye to her. She had already made an appointment with Auntie Zhang to go to Chengdu during the New Year. Because of the tea house, Chen Shi casually ordered a few dishes at the Chinese restaurant next door for lunch. One for them, and the other for the two cultivation maniacs at home. The business in the afternoon was indeed better. Before 3 o'clock, there were already 4 or 5 tables of customers. Qin Ruing did the math. The average cost per table was 80 yuan. At least 15 tables of customers were needed to earn back the daily rent. This did not include the artificial water and electricity. Of course, they did not want to make money. Qin Ruoying did the math just for fun. The owner of the tea house was like an immortal couple, the lively and lovely daughter, and the black cat that lay on the bar all day long. In just 3 days, many people knew that the owner of the Qingyi tea house had changed. It was not because Qinshi was really so eye-catching, but because of the sign hanging at the door. This tea house does not provide chess and card entertainment. This tea house had become a pure tea house. The so-called tea house did not provide chess and card entertainment, but only provided tea and a relatively quiet and relaxing environment. Many people came to the tea house to play cards, so when Qinshi hung the sign outside that no chess and card entertainment was provided, the business of the tea house went downhill. However, there were gains and losses in everything. The chess and card tea house became a pure tea house. There were fewer individual customers, but more frequent customers. For example, Xiao Yuan. Since the day Xiao Yuan drank the black tea here, she would come to the tea house at 11 o'clock every morning. Then she would order a cup of black tea and quietly sit on the sofa to read the book she brought. When she did not receive a call, Xiao Yuan would sit in the tea house all day and would not leave until 6 o'clock in the evening. Every day was like this, so in just a few days, she was very familiar with Nian Nian. Qinshi found out from chatting with her that Xiao Yuan was a junior at Beijing Normal University. The reason she came here every day was that she recently found a part-time job in Hohai. Her part-time job seemed a bit strange. After 3 days, she only went to work on the first day. For the next 2 days, she sat in the tea house all day reading and only left in the afternoon. Although Xiao Yuan did not say what her part-time job was, Qinshi thought it might be related to the bar. This afternoon, including Xiao Yuan, there were only 3 tables of customers in the tea house. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of tires braking on the street outside, followed by a burst of shouting. A customer was alarmed, so he curiously went out of the tea house to take a look. When he went out, he saw a large group of people standing in front of a bar not far away. It was not the opening hours of the bar, and those people did not look like they were here to drink. Some of them seemed to be here to make trouble. This was Hohai, Cigio City, under the emperor's feet. It was strange that someone dared to make trouble here in broad daylight. The customer looked around and then asked his friends to come out and take a look. Qin Ruoying saw this and followed him out. Xiao Yuan sat by the window, so she wanted to see the situation outside through the window. But at this moment, her phone suddenly rang, giving her a fright. Xiao Yuan answered the phone. After listening to a few words, her face changed greatly. She quickly hung up the phone, stood up from her seat, and looked around the tea house at a loss. She ran directly to the bar and then said to Qinshi with a pleading face, "Boss, can you let me hide here for a while?" Chapter 138. There was an empty space below the bar, which was just enough for one person to hide. When Qinshi heard what she said, he was instantly amused. So the commotion outside was caused by her? Xiao Yuan gave Qinshi a good impression of her. She seemed to be like Lin Xian in the past, with poor family conditions, which was why she chose to work part-time in her spare time. Although she deliberately dressed herself up to the nines, she still faintly emitted a reserved and inexperienced aura that belonged to her age. And this was not something that could be covered up by makeup and dressing up. "Then you sit here, I'll go out and take a look at the situation." As he spoke, Qinshi stood up and gave up his chair. When Xiao Yuan saw this, she immediately squatted behind his chair, trying to use the bar and chair to hide her figure. When the little girl saw her sneaking around, she was instantly delighted. After clapping her hands to signal Qinshi to put her down, the little girl ran directly in front of Xiao Yuan and said excitedly, "Sister, do you want to play hide and seek? I can play with you." Hearing this, Xiao Yuan could not help but be speechless. After nervously making a shu gesture, she then said softly to the little girl, "Nian Nian, don't talk to me, just pretend you didn't see me." The little girl looked at her blankly, as if she did not understand what she meant. Xiao Yuan thought for a while, then changed her way of saying, there are bad people coming to catch me. You don't want sister to be caught by bad people, right? When she heard this, the little girl finally understood. Hence, the little girl immediately shook her little head like a rattledrum, and at the same time, did not forget to say righteously, "Sister, don't be afraid. I'll protect you. Shoo. Just pretend you didn't see me." Seeing that Xiao Yuan was trying to explain the situation to the little girl with a conflicted expression, Chen Shi could not help but smile slightly. He stood behind the little girl, gently carried her up, then said to her, "Let sister stay here for a while, Daddy will bring you out to watch the commotion." Seeing that Chen Shi had rescued her from the evil clutches of the little fellow, Xiao Yuan immediately let out a sigh of relief. Then, she looked at Chen Shi with a complicated expression and said softly, "Boss, thank you." Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled at her and comforted her. "It's uncomfortable to squat. Sit on the chair. If you're really scared, I suggest you call the police now." After that, Chen Shi carried the little fellow out of the bar. Looking at his back as he left, Xiao Yuan looked down at the phone in her hand thoughtfully. But after a moment of hesitation, she still put the phone in her bag. Then she hid under the bar counter, trying to hide better. Outside the tea house. When Qin Ruoying saw Chen Shi carrying the little fellow out, she immediately came to his side. Chen Shi turned his head and saw that not far from the street, there were more than 10 or 20 people blocking the door of a bar. This group of people was not old, about 20 years old. They were very arrogant and their mouths were full of obscenities. A young man who looked like the person in charge of the bar was surrounded in the middle and seemed to be trying to discuss something with them. There were more and more people around. Chen Shi listened for a while and got a general idea of the situation. This was a shill bar. The so-called shill bar was that, while operating normally, it would arrange some keyboard players to chat with people on the internet, using dates as bait to lure people to come here to spend money. If it was a normal customer who came to the bar to spend money, then they would think that the bar was not bad and the cost was not high. But if it was a customer who was brought here by a bartender, then their spending here would be more than 10 times higher. Shill bars were not only in the form of bars. Many coffee shops, restaurants, gift shops, and even tea houses might be shill bars. Shill bars had become a complete industry chain, mainly composed of keyboard players, bartenders, and consumption places. Among them, the larger ones might also have a manager. Keyboard players disguise their information as a young and beautiful woman through social media software such as QQ, WeChat, Momo, Tantuan, or dating websites and dating forums, and then seduced some single men or men with bad intentions to come out and meet them. After the keyboard players chatted with the fat sheep online to a certain extent, the bartenders would come out to meet the customers. They did not need to be too beautiful, just with good facial features. In fact, they also used the dirty thoughts of some men. The meeting place was generally near the shill bar. The bartenders themselves were different from what the fat sheep saw on the internet. Most of the fat sheep would not doubt it, because most of them would be dazzled by this sudden encounter. After the meeting, the bartenders would first accompany the fat sheep for a walk, and then take the opportunity to say that they were tired and wanted to sit in the shill bar. Of course, the fat sheep would not refuse. Instead, he looked forward to the bartenders getting drunk. If the fat sheep had not been dazzled by the encounter, he would look at the price list before the bartenders ordered. The items in the shill bar were all priced clearly. If the fat sheep thought it was expensive, he could leave at any time. But if the fat sheep did not even look at the price list and directly wanted to pretend to be rich in front of the bartenders, then it would be embarrassing. 2 drinks and a fruit plate of 388 yuan. This was only the first step, and the price would be lighter. If the fat sheep agreed to let the bartenders order wine, it would be upgraded to the second step. A red wine that cost more than 10 yuan would be sold here for 1,888 yuan and 3,888 yuan. A black-hearted person could even ask for 8,888 yuan directly. If the fat sheep refused to pay, then sorry, the shill bar's hatchet man would come out. It was not a real fight, but a threat. If he did not pay, he would not leave. A smarter fat sheep would ask to share with the bartenders, only give half of the money, and then call the police afterwards. However, it was a pity that the industry itself was in a gray area. As long as the boss of the shill bar was smart, even if the fat sheep called the police afterwards, the boss only needed to refund the money, because they did not break the law. There was a price list on each table. The price was clearly marked, and it was voluntary. Xiao Yuan was obviously a bartender's. But what was strange was that the fat sheep were generally spendthrifts who did not have much social experience. This group of young people who blocked the door of the bar and made trouble were not good people at first glance. To put it bluntly, they were not cut out to be fat sheep. What the hell was going on here? Chen Shi held the little fellow outside the tea house and watched the bustle. At this time, someone said, "She's in the tea house over there." After the group of people heard this sentence, they immediately rushed in the direction of Chen Shi. Several guests in the tea house were still happily watching the bustle, but when they saw the group of people suddenly coming over, they quickly hid to the side. There was a street outside the tea house, and across the street was Hohai. Chen Shi and Qin Ruing stood side by side at the entrance of the tea house. After the group of young people came over, they surrounded them. The little fellow was obviously frightened by their formation, so he immediately shrank back into Chen Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chen Shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruing, and then motioned her to take the child in first. Chapter 139. Chen Shi calmly looked at the group of young people in front of him. Among the group of young people, the youngest was about 20 years old, and the oldest was no more than 25 years old. They were all dressed very fashionably, and a few of them were very handsome. However, they did not stand properly, and the moment they opened their mouths were full of obscenities, inadvertently giving people a frivolous and vulgar feeling. The leader was about 24 or 25 years old. After his companions surrounded the door of the tea house, he stood in front of Chen Shi with a cigarette in his mouth. As if he wanted to create momentum for himself, the young man didn't hold back and directly blew a smoke ring at Chen Shi. However, he didn't expect the wind to be very strong today. So just as he blew out the smoke ring, a sudden gust of wind blew the smoke ring directly into his face. Choked by the smoke, the young man immediately lowered his head and couldn't help but rub his eyes. As a result, the imposing manner that he had deliberately created was destroyed and completely disappeared. This young man was called Wang Hao, and he was also a famous person in Shangjing's nightclub circle. Whenever it was night time, it was time for Wang Hao to shuttle through the major bars. Recently, Hua Xia suddenly set off a hip-hop craze, just like the rock craze of the 80s and 90s, which suddenly became popular all over the country. Wang Hao was one of the first underground rappers. After catching up with the hip-hop craze, he was also in the limelight in Shangjing. Most of the bars in Hohai were small bars, so Wang Hao wasn't familiar with this area. The reason why he brought people here today was because one of his brothers was cheated of money by a bartender. His brother was related to him and just came out from his hometown to mingle with him. Before, he was a very honest person and didn't see much of the world, so he didn't understand the twists and turns of the bar. After chatting with the keyboard player online for a while, the brothers suddenly became hot-headed and wanted to ask the girl to come out and meet. Coincidentally, the bartender that the boss arranged for him was Xiao Yuan. In terms of appearance, Xiao Yuan's appearance was definitely the best among the group of bartenders. As a young man who had just come to Shangjing, when had he ever been in close contact with a beauty of this level? Therefore, he was mesmerized by Xiao Yuan at that time. Xiao Yuan didn't say much to him before he excitedly ordered some wine. The more he drank, the more confused he became. In the end, he directly opened a big order of 20,000 yuan. 20,000 yuan, 20% for the keyboard, 40% for the bartender, and another 40% for the boss. After the order was confirmed, Xiao Yuan would get 8,000 yuan. Usually, the bill would only be settled once every half a month or a month. That was because if the customer called the police, the bill would be refunded. Therefore, the money had not yet reached Xiao Yuan's hands. It was rare to see someone like Wang Hao who didn't call the police and instead brought his own people to cause trouble. Everyone was in the same business. Wang Hao was in the right now, so the boss decisively refunded the 20,000 yuan to him. But what was strange was that Wang Hao was not satisfied with the money he got back. He actually asked the boss to hand over Xiao Yuan. This request was too much. The boss couldn't agree, so he tried to negotiate with them. However, while the boss was negotiating with Wang Hao, a girl who was usually jealous of Qiao Yuan secretly betrayed Qiao Yuan. Therefore, Wang Hao brought people directly to the tea house. The girl who betrayed them was very clever and didn't expose herself. The boss also didn't know who betrayed them. When he saw Wang Hao rushing to the tea house with his men, the owner was a little anxious and hurriedly made a call for help. Refund was a reasonable request, but taking people away was absolutely not. Otherwise, how could he continue to mingle on this street? Unfortunately, it was only 3 in the afternoon, so the thugs were still sleeping at home. After the boss vented his anger on the phone, he looked at the tea house not far away with worry. Most of the people who could open a shop in Hohai weren't easy to deal with. A strong dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts. Therefore, after Wang Hao fiercely threw the cigarette butt on the ground, he casually said to Qin Shi, "Are you the boss of this shop? This has nothing to do with you. Just hand over that Qiao Qiao and we'll leave immediately. We won't hinder your business." After saying that, Wang Hao squinted his eyes and quietly looked at Qin Shi. If people who play rock have a wanton temperament, then people who play hip-hop are obviously their upgraded version. They always act like they are the boss and don't even put Mother Earth in their eyes. However, Qin Shi's answer was somewhat out of his expectations. He saw Qin Shi suddenly smiled and casually replied, "Qiao Qiao? I don't know, there's no such person here." F***CK, are you trying to scare us? Brother Hao, don't talk nonsense with him. Let's go in and search, don't let that girl run away. Yes, go in and search. Wang Hao didn't speak, he just looked up and down at Qin Shi. However, the group of young people behind him suddenly couldn't sit still. Qin Shi slowly glanced at the people in front of him, his expression didn't change. He stood quietly at the door of the tea house, as if he didn't intend to let Wang Hao and the others in. But at this moment, a young man who was originally standing at the back of the crowd suddenly moved. He suddenly turned around, picked up a fist-sized stone from the ground, and then directly smashed it toward the tea house's glass. Bang! The expected sound of glass breaking did not ring out. The glass seemed to be tempered glass, and the stone only made a loud collision sound when it hit it. The stone fell to the ground, but the glass didn't move. The young man was not convinced. After fiercely staring at Qin Shi, he picked up the stone from the ground again. But this time, he didn't smash the stone out. Instead, he stood directly in front of the glass window with the stone. Bang! 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 The young man held the stone and smashed the glass with all his strength. Qin Ruing sat on the chair next to Qiao Yuan with the little girl in her arms. The little girl shrank in Qin Ruing's arms. This movement not only scared the little girl, but also the guests in the tea house. Seeing that the young man kept smashing the glass with the stone, the guests retreated to the corner. This group of young people was simply lawless. The young man smashed the stone for a while, but there was still no trace of damage on the glass. At this moment, Qin Shi spoke. "That's tempered glass. Be careful, don't hurt your own hand and come back to me later to pay for the medical expenses." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man picked up the stone and smashed it again as if he didn't hear him at all. Bang! The loud collision sounded again. Immediately after, the young man suddenly let out a wail that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Everyone hurriedly turned to look, only to see him covering his right hand with his left hand and constantly shouting. Blood dripped down from his fingers. It seemed that Qin Shi was right. Chapter 140. Smashing the glass and injuring his own hand? This sudden turn of events shocked everyone present. It seems to be quite serious? Quickly take him to the doctor to stop the bleeding. Turn left on the street, there is a small clinic less than 200 meters away. Seeing that the young man's hand was bleeding profusely, Qin Shi reminded Wang Hao with a smile. After hearing Qin Shi's words, Wang Hao seemed to have finally come back to his senses. He hurriedly asked someone to take the injured person to the clinic to stop the bleeding. After the injured person left, the group of young people in front of him could not help but look at each other. They wanted to smash someone else's glass as a demonstration, but they did not expect to injure their own hand instead of breaking the glass. This was truly a great loss of face. Wang Hao coughed a little awkwardly. But immediately after, he said to Chen Shi with some annoyance, "Boss, I didn't bring so many brothers here today to stand here in the cold wind. You opened the door to do business, so you should know that it's better to avoid trouble. How about you let the girl come out, and we'll part on good terms?" Chen Shi did not respond. Instead, he smiled and shook his head. "Xin, do you believe that we'll smash your broken tea house?" It was unknown who had suddenly said such a sentence. Hearing this, Chen Shi thought for a moment, then asked with some doubt, "Didn't we smash it just now?" As soon as these words came out, it was like a spark falling into a pile of gunpowder. The group of young people in front of him was instantly ignited by him. A few of the hot-tempered ones were about to rush up on the spot. Looking at their aggressive postures, it seemed like they were about to make a move. However, before Chen Shi could react, Wang Hao had already opened his arms and stopped them. Wang Hao was not stupid, and he was already past the age of fighting for personal feelings. Although he usually acted extremely arrogantly, in reality he was very measured in his actions. This was not a small county, but the capital of Huaxia, Shangjing. The water in Shangjing was very deep. If you casually threw a brick on the street, it could hit a big shot that they absolutely could not afford to offend. Wang Hao had come from a small county and had finally made a name for himself. So how could he do something as stupid as taking the lead to cause trouble? Even if they wanted to make a scene, they would only do so after he left. Just like wine stalls, every industry had its own rules of survival. Throwing stones and smashing glass was actually not a problem at all. Even if they rushed in and smashed things up, they would only need to pay some money in the end. Article 275 of the criminal law clearly stipulates that, in cases of intentional destruction of property, if the loss of public or private property exceeds 5,000 renminbi, the case shall be filed for prosecution. In other words, as long as the loss did not exceed 5,000 yuan, the police would not file a case. These days, hooligans were not scary. What was scary was that hooligans were cultured. Therefore, it was fine to smash the shop, but not to beat people up. Now that there were so many people watching, if this person were to lie on the ground and insist that there was something wrong with his brain, then they would obviously have to spend a short holiday in the police station. However, Wang Hao's patience had been worn out by Chen Shi. After signaling them not to make a move, Wang Hao spat on the ground and said fiercely, "Go in and find him." After saying that, Wang Hao stared coldly at Chen Shi, as if warning Chen Shi not to blindly interfere. Following his order, the young people behind Wang Hao swarmed toward the door of the tea house. However, they were wrong. They did not make a move, but that did not mean that Chen Shi would not make a move. Chen Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with them. If anyone dared to approach the door, he would kick them. Being a bartender was not a glorious profession. After figuring out the cause of the matter, Chen Shi wanted Qiao Yuan to go out and give them an explanation. After all, it was Qiao Yuan who was wrong first. But unfortunately, this group of young people were very stubborn. Under their superficial skin was an infinitely inflated heart. The group of people wanted to hang a sign on their faces as they walked, saying, "I am the most awesome, I am the best in the world." Their aggressive appearance also scared Nian Yin. Therefore, the side that was supposed to be in the right was particularly hateful in Chen Shi's eyes. The two young people who rushed at the front thought that Chen Shi did not dare to stop them, so they did not even look at Chen Shi and rushed toward the door. However, just as they were about to touch the door of the tea house, Chen Shi suddenly kicked them back. Chen Shi had a sense of propriety. He did not hurt them, but made it impossible for them to get close to the door. Looking at the two brothers who were kicked back by Chen Shi, Wang Hao suddenly flew into a rage. "Timdi, you dare to make a move? Beat them to death." Since the other party had made a move, how could he tolerate it? Therefore he led the charge. At this moment, the door behind Chen Shi suddenly opened. "Stop!" With a shout, Qiao Yuan hurriedly ran in front of Chen Shi, and then directly blocked him behind her. Qiao Yuan glanced at Wang Hao with slight fear in her eyes. After hesitating for a moment, she pretended to be calm and said, "This has nothing to do with Boss Chen. I am Qiao Qiao. If you have any problems, Come at me. Xiao Yuan had been paying attention to the movement outside the door. When she heard that they were about to make a move, she could not help but rush out. Although Xiao Yuan did not understand why these people were looking for her, there was no doubt that this was caused by her, so she could not implicate others. Wang Hao stopped and looked at Xiao Yuan. He could not help but show a strange expression on his face. Xiao Yuan was not stupid. When she realized that the other party had brought a lot of people, she decisively called the police. Therefore, standing in front of Wang Hao, Xiao Yuan had some confidence. She held the phone and shook it in a circle. Then, Xiao Yuan continued to say to Wang Hao, "I'm warning you not to mess around. I just called the police. The police will be here soon." Hearing this, Wang Hao could not help but laugh. He casually mocked, "Call the police? What law did we break? Be asterisk tisich, let me tell you. It was a small matter, but now you've made a big deal out of it. Just you wait." After he finished speaking, he pointed at Xiao Yuan fiercely. Xiao Yuan was frightened by him. She could not help but take a small step back. But what was strange was that Wang Hao did not do anything. Instead, he brought his people directly to the opposite side of the street. Then, they stood in a row against the railing. Xiao Yuan was a little confused. She could not help but turn to look at Qin Shi and ask, "What happened to them? Did you call the police?" "Ah, I called the police." "Then let's wait for the police to come." After he finished speaking, Qin Shi turned and returned to the tea house. Xiao Yuan looked back at Wang Hao and his people with some doubts. She realized that he was still staring at her fiercely, so she followed Qin Shi into the tea house in fear. Gangsters had a characteristic, which was that they bullied the weak and feared the strong. So when they heard that the police were coming, they immediately became obedient. But so what if the police came? Were they going to take them all back to the police station? In Wang Hao's words, that was. Chapter 141. After hearing that Xiao Yuan had called the police, Wang Hao and his men dispersed. Gathering a crowd to make trouble? No, they just came to Hohai to see the scenery. Xiao Yuan was still a little confused, but seeing that Wang Hao and his men hadn't left, she didn't dare to run around and could only obediently follow Qin Shi back to the tea house. After Qin Shi returned to the tea house, the guests at the two tables gave him a thumbs up and praised, "Boss, you're amazing, you're a real man." Not to mention who was right and who was wrong. Just Qin Shi blocking the entrance of the tea house by himself was enough to make them applaud and praise him. This boss was very competent. Qin Ruing whispered to the little girl at the bar, making her giggle from time to time. After seeing that Qin Shi had returned, the little girl immediately rubbed against Qin Ruing's arms and reached out for Qin Shi to carry her. After Qin Shi picked her up from Qin Ruing's arms, the little girl asked sweetly, "Papa, what were you doing outside?" Papa was reasoning with them. "Why? Did they scare you?" Hearing this, the little girl immediately shook her head and pouted, "No, I don't like them." Children were sometimes very strange, and the first impression a stranger left on them was very important. If this person was someone they liked, then they would immediately be very kind to this person, as if they were familiar with him. But if this person wasn't someone they liked, then sorry, the child would stay as far away as possible. Unless their parents were around, they wouldn't get too close. The group of people outside was obviously not the little girl's favorite. Qin Shi touched the little girl's little face and said with a smile, "This is our home. If you don't like them, then Papa won't let them in, okay?" But the little girl happily acted coquettishly. At this time, Xiao Yuan slowly walked over. After hesitating for a moment, she said very embarrassedly, "Boss, I'm sorry for the trouble." After saying that, Xiao Yuan suddenly bowed to Qin Shi. Before Qin Shi could say anything, Qin Ruing waved at her and smiled. "It's nothing. Why don't you come over and have a chat?" Hearing the lady boss's words, Xiao Yuan obediently sat beside her. "How long have you been in this business?" "Half a month. How much did you earn?" Xiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. Then, she said hesitantly, "If this order is included, it should be more than 20,000 yuan. However, the bill hasn't been paid yet. Why do you want to do this? If I remember correctly, you are a student of Beijing Normal University, right?" Qing Bei is from Beijing Normal University, and Beijing Normal University is known as one of the 4 famous universities in Beijing. It can even be ranked in the top 20 in the country. Do you think it's appropriate for a student from Beijing Normal University to be a prostitute? Qin Ruing's voice was very soft and gentle, but every word pierced Xiao Yuan's heart. Xiao Yuan lowered her head in silence. After a long while, her tears flowed down silently. Seeing that his wife was about to talk about life ideals with others, Chen Shi held the little fellow and sat in the center of the lobby, leaving some private space for them. Xiao Yuan sobbed in a low voice. Qin Ruing waited for a moment, then took out a few tissues and handed them to her. Can you tell me why? Xiao Yuan took the tissues and wiped her tears. After taking a deep breath, she looked at Qin Ruing and said sadly, "My father is sick. He needs money. I've done a lot of work, but I can't make any money. Someone recommended me to work in a KTV. I was afraid, so I didn't go. But I really need money, so they recommended me to be a prostitute." Xiao Yuan's family was very ordinary. Her father was a middle school teacher, and her mother was an elementary school teacher. Their income was not high. They relied on her father's tuition classes to earn some extra money. Their family barely reached the standard of a well-off family. She was a very happy girl. Although her family was not rich, she did not have to worry about food and clothing. Her family was happy. She could be regarded as a pretty girl in a small family. Xiao Yuan also worked hard. She was the top liberal arts scholar in her county during the college entrance examination. However, sometimes the reality was more cliché than stories. After all, life was like an electrocardiogram. If it was smooth sailing, it meant that you were dead. 3 years ago, Xiao Yuan's father was diagnosed with chronic uremia. So there were only 2 paths left in front of them: lifelong dialysis or kidney transplant. The price of dialysis was not too expensive. The charge was slightly different in each place. The price of a single dialysis was about 400 yuan. A patient had to undergo dialysis at least 3 or 4 times a week, about 13 times a month. It cost 5,200 yuan, about 60,000 yuan a year. 60,000 yuan didn't sound like much. However, for an ordinary family in a small county, this was already a huge expense. Because of his health, Xiao Yuan's father was forced to close the tuition classes. However, he did not quit. Instead, he insisted on going to work every day. Xiao Yuan's father often said, "Xiao, don't worry about family matters. Just study hard. When you graduate and find a good job, Dad can enjoy life." This illness was not life-threatening for a while, but it would put a lot of financial pressure on a family. So every time Xiao Yuan returned home, she would feel that her parents had aged a lot. It was also because of this that Xiao Yuan worked part-time while studying hard to earn scholarships since her freshman year. She had done many jobs, such as waitress, tutor, courier, and part-time model. Part-time model was the fastest way to earn money, but this kind of good thing was not common. In fact, she had the qualifications to become a contract model, but Xiao Yuan did not forget that she was still a student. So, she decisively refused. She wanted to give her father a kidney transplant, but it was a sky-high price. The kidney source started at 200,000 yuan, and the surgery cost 50,000 to 60,000 yuan. After the kidney transplant was successful, he would need to take anti-rejection drugs, which cost about 10,000 yuan a month. After half a year, she would have to pray that there would be no infection or rejection. Otherwise, the condition might worsen. Moreover, a kidney source was not easy to find. Although a kidney transplant might not be able to cure him, compared to lifelong dialysis, a kidney transplant was indeed the most ideal treatment. So, Xiao Yuan only wanted to save 300,000 yuan as soon as possible, in case a suitable kidney source appeared in the future and she did not have the money to give her father a kidney transplant. Xiao Yuan was very thrifty. Even the clothes she was wearing were borrowed from her best friend. There were 38 cups of black tea in Xinshi's tea house. If it were not for the fact that the bar saleswoman had to wait near the bar at all times, and sometimes she would wait for a whole day, she would not come in and sit down for a cup of tea. Being a bar saleswoman was indeed very profitable. In addition, she had some beauty. So, Qiao Yuan had successfully slaughtered a few fat sheep in just half a month. The money came so easily, but it also made Qiao Yuan feel a sense of guilt. So, she saved these people's phone numbers. She had already decided that when her father recovered from his illness, she would return the money to these people one by one and sincerely say, "Thank you." She really could not think of any other way, so, sorry. Qin Ruoying was a very qualified listener. She sat there and quietly listened to Qiao Yuan's story. After Qiao Yuan finished her story, Qiao Yuan could no longer hold it in. She suddenly lay on the bar counter and burst into tears. Perhaps she had been suppressed for too long, so the girl cried very sadly. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying gently put the tissue next to Qiao Yuan. Then she looked at Chen Shi thoughtfully. Chen Shi saw this and nodded gently at her. With his 5 senses, he could easily determine whether the girl was lying or not. When Qiao Yuan was talking just now, Chen Shi was listening quietly by the side. So he was very sure that the girl was not lying. Chapter 142. After listening to Qiao Yuan's story for a few minutes, there was a burst of sirens on the street outside. The Ministry of Public Security's 110 Police Service Standardization Standards clearly stated that police personnel must respond quickly after receiving a police order. Any major threat to the personal and property safety of citizens, emergency call for help. In the city, they must arrive at the scene within 5 minutes. In the suburbs, they must arrive at the scene within 10 minutes. This was a hard indicator, so don't make a false police report. Otherwise, you will be invited to drink tea for a few hours. Seeing that the police came, Chen Shi handed the little guy to Qin Ruoying, and he walked out with Qiao Yuan. The police car stopped in front of the tea house. The driver was a middle-aged policeman, and the policeman in the passenger seat was younger, about the same age as Wang Hao. At first glance, it was the standard of a civilian police and an auxiliary police. The middle-aged policeman was not polite. After glancing at Wang Hao and his group, he directly asked Chen Shi, "Did you call the police?" Chen Shi nodded. When he was about to explain the situation to the policeman, the middle-aged policeman pointed at Wang Hao and his group and asked, "Is it them?" Hearing this, Qiao Yuan suddenly acted like a class monitor reporting to the teacher. She quickly interrupted and said, "It's them. They just blocked the entrance of the tea house and caused trouble. They even smashed the window." "Did they do anything? Did they suffer any losses?" Qiao Yuan was stunned for a moment. After glancing at the untouched window, she said with some difficulty, "They didn't do anything. It seems that there are no losses. Okay, I got it." The middle-aged policeman nodded, then turned and walked directly across the street. This was a bar street, so there were often some drunk people causing trouble here. As a policeman in the area, he had seen too many, so he was not surprised by these situations. "Who's the leader?" As soon as the middle-aged policeman's voice fell, Wang Hao immediately replied with a smile, "There's no leader. Just a few friends gathering here, chatting and looking at the scenery of Hohai." "Don't give me that. Hurry up and leave. Do what you need to do." The middle-aged policeman glared at him and waved his hand to let them leave. Seeing this, Wang Hao said with some dissatisfaction, "Hey, officer, we didn't break the law, right? This is not Zongnanhai. Are we not allowed to hang out here?" "That's right. Isn't this bar street? We still have to wait for the night to drink," one of the lackeys casually added. But when he spoke, his eyes were looking at Hohai, as if he didn't dare to look at the middle-aged policeman. The middle-aged policeman was also a veteran. He naturally knew how to deal with this group of punks, so he immediately said to Wang Hao, "Take out your ID card." Wang Hao didn't seem to hear him clearly. The middle-aged policeman glanced at him, then suddenly saluted him. Then he took out his ID and said seriously, "There have been many robberies around here. In order to ensure the safety of the people, I have the right to interrogate you. Please cooperate with the investigation. Otherwise, I have the right to forcibly summon you. If you have any objections, you can call 110 or 12,389 to complain. This is my police number. Please show me your ID card." Wang Hao was terrified when he saw that the middle-aged policeman seemed to have changed into a different person in an instant. Therefore, he quickly squeezed out a smile and saluted to the policeman. Then, he said with a cheeky smile, "Understood, right away, we'll leave right away." After that, he called his brothers and left. The middle-aged policeman saw that he was tactful, so he was satisfied and took back his ID. As a basic policeman, he was also considered to be a very responsible kind, so he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he was going to wait until Wang Hao and his group left. Under the gaze of the middle-aged policeman, Wang Hao had to reluctantly take his group to their car. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So, before he left, he didn't forget to give Qin Shi a middle finger, and then slowly made a gesture of slitting his neck. Looking at his posture, he seemed to be silently telling Qin Shi that this matter wasn't over yet. The characteristics of hooligans, besides bullying the weak and fearing the strong, were also disgusting. If a business offended them, they wouldn't hurt them, but they would endlessly harass them, making it impossible for them to do business. Xiao Yuan also understood what Wang Hao wanted to express, so she quickly said to Qin Shi, "Boss, I'm sorry. I'll go and explain it to them." After that, she wanted to chase after Wang Hao and his group. This matter had to be resolved. Why not take advantage of the fact that the police were still here and have a good talk with Wang Hao? At most, she would just have to pay for it. However, Xiao Yuan had just taken 2 steps when Qin Shi suddenly pulled her back, then shook his head at her, indicating that she shouldn't go. It had to be said that Xiao Yuan really thought of this matter too simply. Wang Hao was obviously coming for her. Although she didn't know what they wanted to do, it was obviously not for money. There must be another purpose. Seeing that Xiao Yuan was still confused, Qin Shi sighed softly, "Don't go. I think they're not doing it for money, but for you as a person, me as a person? What do you mean? Boss, I don't understand." However, Qin Shi shook his head and didn't explain further. Seeing this, Xiao Yuan could only stand beside Qin Shi obediently. The boss had just saved her, so he shouldn't be a bad person. Listening to him should be the right thing to do. Wang Hao and his group drove 4 cars. They weren't luxury cars, but after the cars started, there was a rumbling sound. Obviously, they were modified cars, and the throttle was changed and the turbine was installed, so when the accelerator was stepped on, there was a deafening roar. As if to demonstrate, when Wang Hao drove past the door of the tea house, he deliberately stepped on the accelerator, making the noise even louder. Xiao Yuan couldn't help but cover her ears. The middle-aged policeman stood silently by the side, looking at Wang Hao and his group with a blank face. He was a policeman, not a traffic policeman, so he couldn't do anything about this kind of thing. Otherwise, he would have detained these bastards' cars. Wang Hao rolled down the window, spitting out a mouthful of saliva, then opened his mouth and silently said, F***CKU. Then he gave Qin Shi the middle finger again. Changing gears, braking, and stepping on the accelerator. After a set of smooth operations, Wang Hao laughed wildly and sped up. The 4 modified cars roared and sped away in an instant. The middle-aged policeman shook his head, as if he was lamenting the degeneration of the world. However, at this moment, Qin Shi suddenly waved his arm. Then, Wang Hao's car slammed into the railing of Hohai. Bang! In order to send them on their way, Qin Shi even broke the railing. Therefore, when Wang Hao's car hit the railing immediately broke, and his car flew into Hohai. The skating rink in Hohai usually opened in January. Although some places were already frozen, it wasn't very thick. The car fell into the water, causing a huge splash. The middle-aged policeman was stunned by the scene in front of him. It wasn't until the car slowly sank into the water that he suddenly came back to his senses and quickly called the auxiliary police to help him save people. It was just a small punishment and a big warning, not really taking their lives. Therefore, in order to prevent any accidents, Qin Shi had already considerately opened the car door for Wang Hao while he was still in the air. Chapter 143. This year was not a warm winter, but a cold winter. So in December, the water surface of Hohai had already condensed a thin layer of ice. Wang Hao's car was filled with 5 people. After the car drove into the water, the 5 people struggled to swim back to the shore. The other people on the shore hurriedly pulled them up. Looking at the people who were squeezing into the car, the middle-aged policeman couldn't help but sigh, karma. Although tourists accidentally fell into Hohai from time to time, the middle-aged policeman had been in this area for so long, and he really hadn't heard of anyone who could drive a car into Hohai. The car was probably scrapped, and how to get it out had become a big problem. It was estimated that the Shikahai subdistrict community would seek compensation from them. This group of stinky brats was also unlucky. But this was no longer the middle-aged policeman's business, so he called the young policeman and prepared to leave. "Comrade, take care." After Qin smiled and said hello to the middle-aged policeman, he took Qiao Yuan back to the tea house. As soon as they walked into the tea house, Qin Ruoying glanced at Qin with a smile. She knew what happened outside, so she guessed that this must be Qin good deed. Young people don't know the immensity of heaven and earth, a little punishment is okay. After being disturbed by this group of bastards, the guests at the table who just left didn't even pay the bill. Now they didn't know where they went. After the couple cleaned up the teacups at their table, they returned to the bar with the little girl in their arms. Qiao Yuan stood in the lobby stupidly and looked at their calm appearance. For a while, she didn't know what to say. After a long time, Qiao Yuan came to the bar, bowed to the couple, and said sincerely, "Boss, lady boss, thank you." Hearing this, Qin Ruoying said with a smile, "Give you a piece of advice, don't do this in the future. This is not a glorious career. With your education, you should be able to find a very good job in the future. I hope you can distinguish the priorities and don't ruin your future." After hearing her words, Qiao Yuan fell silent. After hesitating for a while, she nodded lightly and said in a low voice with a complicated expression, "I understand." "Thank you, lady boss." Qin Ruoying smiled and turned to look at Chen Shi. Chen Shi looked at his wife helplessly. Then, he grabbed a black pill from the plate of sunflower seeds in front of the big cat. The big cat was lying lazily on the bar counter. When it saw that one of its snacks was taken away, it immediately stuck its head out and let out a dissatisfied meow. Chen Shi stroked its head, then smiled at Qiao Yuan and said, "This is a pill left behind by an old Chinese doctor. I heard that it's especially helpful for kidney diseases. You can take this pill back to your father and see if it has any effect. Don't worry, it's a pure Chinese medicine formula. Even if it doesn't have any effect, there definitely won't be any side effects." Qiao Yuan took the pill skeptically. After glancing at it, she wrapped the pill in a tissue and said to Chen Shi solemnly, "Thank you, boss. Go. Come, Nyan, say goodbye to your sister." "Goodbye, sister." Hearing this, the little girl immediately stood on Chen Shi's lap and stuck her head out from behind the bar counter. She smiled and waved goodbye to Qiao Yuan. "Goodbye, Nyan. Sister will come to see you later." Qiao Yuan turned and left with a complicated expression. After leaving the tea house, she couldn't help but look back at the signboard with the words, "Qingyi Tea House," written on it. Then, as if she had finally made up her mind, she quickly walked towards the bar. The weather wasn't very good today. It was always gray. Although it wasn't hazy yet, there wasn't even a bit of sunlight in the cold weather. There was no way to cheer people up. After the little episode just now, it was already 4:30 in the afternoon. Perhaps she had been infected by the big cat. The little girl sat on Chen Shi's lap and lazily put her chin on the bar counter. She constantly blew with her small mouth, trying to blow a tissue into the air. Chen Shi wanted to take her out for a walk, but the little girl pouted and shook her head. It looked like she didn't want to move at all. The TV in the tea house didn't have a broadcasting function, so she couldn't order cartoons. Since she couldn't watch cartoons, she wanted to serve tea to the customers. There weren't many customers, so the little girl was bored to death. Qin Ruoying saw this and smiled gently. "Nyan, mommy will tell you a story, okay?" Hearing this, the little girl's eyes suddenly lit up. Mommy's stories were better than Daddy's stories. So she immediately climbed from Chen Shi's lap to Qin Ruoying's lap. Then she shook Qin Ruoying's arm and smiled. "Mommy, tell me." "Okay, sit down first. Mommy will tell you a story." Once upon a time, there was a temple on the mountain. Qin Ruoying told the little girl the story of the 3 monks. But before the story was half finished, the door of the tea house was suddenly pushed open. Seeing this, Chen Shi interrupted Qin Ruoying's story and said directly to the little girl, Ninian, look, there are guests. Guests? After a few days of getting used to it, the little girl had become familiar with the reception work of the tea house. So when she heard that there were guests, she was so excited that she wanted to jump out of Qin Ruoying's arms. Qin Ruoying was afraid that she would jump and fall, so she had to put her down carefully. The little girl seemed to be very enthusiastic about greeting guests. So when she stepped on the ground, she ran out from behind the bar counter. However, when the little girl ran out of the bar counter and saw the guests, she couldn't help but be stunned. Immediately after, she ran back to the bar counter and hid. Seeing this, Chen Shi picked her up and carried her out of the bar counter. Hello, please take a seat. The person who came was an old man. That wasn't the point. The point was that he had two children who were about the same age as Nian. The two children looked exactly the same, and they were dressed exactly the same. They looked like they were carved out of the same mold, twins. It was the first time that other children had appeared in the tea house, and they were a pair. The little girl had never seen twins before, so she was scared and ran back. After hearing Chen Shi's words, the old man took the twins and sat in the seat where Qiao Yuan had sat before. After carrying the little girl to the old man's side, Chen Shi asked with a smile, "What would you like to drink, sir?" The old man didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the little girl in Chen Shi's arms with interest. The little girl seemed to be a little shy. She lay on Chen Shi's shoulder and didn't dare to turn her head. "This is your daughter?" "How old is she?" 4.5 years old. Hearing this, the old man couldn't help but laugh. Then he pointed at the twins who were squeezed on the sofa and said, "What a coincidence, these two children are also 4.5 years old." "It is a bit of a coincidence." As he spoke, Chen Shi put the little girl on the ground. Then he held her hand and said to her, "Ninian, come and say hello to Grandpa." The little girl hesitated for a moment. Then, with Chen Shi's encouragement, she said very politely to the old man, "Hello, Grandpa." Chapter 144. Twins. According to statistics, the average birth rate of twins in the world was 89:1. In other words, out of every 89 pregnant women, there would be one who would give birth to twins. Before the two-child policy was introduced, the number of births per day in Huaxia was around 20,800. If it was accurate to the second, then Huaxia would give birth to a baby every 4.15 seconds. Even with a 1% probability, Huaxia would give birth to 2,000 pairs of twins per day. After the two-child policy was introduced, this number would double. Twins were not a particularly rare existence. However, the little girl was too young, so when she saw two children who looked exactly the same, she was immediately frightened. After she obediently greeted her grandfather, the little girl immediately shrank behind Chen Shi, then carefully looked at the twins in front of her. The twins were both boys. They had delicate features and were very cute. Twins generally looked very similar because they were identical twins, so the genes they carried were almost the same. A small number of twins did not look alike, but that was because they were heterozygotic twins. If the mother laid 2 eggs and produced 2 fertilized eggs, then the genes they carried would naturally be different. When they grew up, there would be a clear difference. The twins did look very similar, and the children were still young, so even with Chen Shi's eyesight, he could only find a few subtle differences. Seeing that the little girl was a little scared, Chen Shi picked her up, then smiled at the old man and said, "The children look so similar, how do you usually tell them apart?" Hearing this, the old man laughed and said, "The older brother has a mole behind his earlobe, but the younger brother doesn't, but it's not obvious, so I made a mark on their clothes." After that, the old man asked the two children to turn around. Hearing their grandfather's words, the twins obediently turned around and lay on the sofa. At this time, Chen Shi realized that there were numbers written on the back of their clothes. On the left was 1, and on the right was 2. Didn't the 18th National Assembly propose to talk about civilization, so I named the children Civilization. The left is the older brother, and the right is the younger brother, Xiaowen, Xiaming. Civilization? Chen Shi pondered for a moment, then said to the little fellow with a smile, "Come on, Ninian, Introduce yourself to Grandpa. The little guy hugged Chen-Shi's neck with one hand and tilted his head to look at the twins. After that, he quickly turned his head and buried his little head in Chen-Shi's shoulder. Seeing her like an ostrich, Chen-Shi could only say to the old man apologetically, "Sorry, the child is shy, it's okay. My two kids used to be afraid of strangers too. I've gotten used to bringing them out for a stroll." After chatting with the old man for a while, Chen-Shi suddenly remembered his duty, so he quickly pointed to the price list on the table and said with a smile, "What do you want?" "Vegetarian tea. I have something to do later, so I'll leave after sitting for a while." "All right, please wait a moment." Chen-Shi returned to the bar with the little fellow in his arms. Qin Ruing also noticed the little fellow's strange behavior, so she quickly asked, "What's wrong?" She probably hasn't seen twins before, so she's scared. While talking, Chen-Shi handed the little fellow to Qin Ruing. Hearing this, Qin Ruing had to take the little fellow from Chen-Shi's hands and then explain to her what twins were. At this time, Chen-Shi made a cup of tea for the old man. The waiters were on strike, so only he, the boss, had to do it personally. The little fellow rarely dealt with people of the same age. Now there were two of them, and they looked exactly the same, so naturally she was scared. After listening to Qin Ruing's explanation, the little fellow nodded as if he understood something. Tilting her head and thinking for a while, she suddenly pouted and asked, "Mommy, why don't I have a sister who looks exactly the same?" Qin Ruing was amused by her, so she pinched the tip of her little nose and asked, "You want a sister?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately nodded, then said with anticipation, "I want a sister. A sister can play with me." You only know how to play." In fact, Qin Ruing had already guessed why she wanted a sister. It was because she was lonely, and there was no one of the same age to play with her. She and Chen-Shi had no plans to have a second child for the time being, and distant water could not put out a nearby fire, so the best way now was to bring the little fellow out to interact with people of the same age. Thinking of this, Qin Ruing carried the little fellow, then walked directly to the twins. Chen-Shi placed the teacup in front of the old man, and was about to turn back to the bar when Qin Ruing brought the little fellow over. The husband and wife had a tacit understanding, and Chen-Shi understood her meaning without a word of explanation. Thus, after Chen-Shi's introduction, the old man also understood the purpose of Qin Ruing's visit. Every parent hoped that their children would be able to play with their peers because for children under the age of 6, this was something that would only be beneficial and not detrimental. Seeing that the old man agreed, Qin Ruing did not stand on ceremony and directly brought the little fellow to the twins, then smiled at the two children and asked, "Can you let your sister play with you?" After hearing her words, the older brother sitting on the left heard her, and without discussing with his younger brother, he immediately said, "Okay." Then he looked at the old man and asked, "Grandpa, can we play marbles with our sister?" "Go, don't bully her." "No. We won't bully her, we want to protect her." The older brother jumped down from the sofa excitedly, patted his chest and promised. He directly took the little fellow's hand, like a little adult, and said to the little fellow, "Sister, I'll play with you." The younger brother seemed to be afraid that they would miss him, so he immediately squeezed from behind the older brother. Looking at the younger brother, it seemed that he also wanted to hold the little fellow. Thus, Qin Ruing handed the little fellow's left hand to him. The two brothers were actually more than 2 months older than the little fellow. When the three of them stood together, they were half a head taller than the little fellow. The two brothers took Nian around the hall. After finding an open space in the corner, they immediately squatted on the ground and took out marbles from their pockets. The little fellow had not played with glass marbles yet. Therefore, when she saw the colorful glass marbles, she was immediately attracted by the glass ball with a strange pattern in the middle. The little fellow grabbed a marble and played with it. Seeing this, the older brother immediately said to her, "Sister, we'll teach you how to play." But children could always play together happily. Qin Ruing stood beside the three little fellows with a smile, quietly watching them play marbles. The little fellow had not played with people of the same age for a long time, so in the beginning, she was a little reserved. But after playing for a while, the little fellow gradually let go of herself, and the range of her movements and laughter became louder and louder. Chapter 145. Playing marbles was actually a very fair competitive game, and it was very helpful for children to learn physics in the future. For example, when they learned about parabola, momentum, force, and other subjects, they could not help but think of playing marbles as a child. This also made it easier for children to understand the content of the teacher's lecture. The little girl had never played this kind of game in her life, so she was immediately excited. The twins were already veterans at this game. When they saw that their sister did not know how to play, they let her play. The little girl played 3 times, but they only played once. Qin Ruing accompanied the children, and Qin Shi accompanied the old man to play Go. However, halfway through the game, the old man's phone suddenly rang. The old man took out his phone and looked at it. His face suddenly sank. After picking up the phone, the old man did not wait for the person on the other end of the phone to speak first. He said directly into the phone, "I'm here, don't rush me." After that, he seemed very impatient and hung up the phone. When Qinshi saw this, he smiled and asked, "Is there anything else?" "Sai, some family matters. I have to go. I lost this game. Let's come back another day." The old man shook his head and said, after a gentle sigh, he stood up reluctantly and asked casually, "How much is this tea? You've been sitting here for less than half an hour, and you haven't drunk much tea. You don't have to pay. This bill is on me." Since Qinshi said so, the old man didn't hold back. After thanking Qinshi, he told his 2 grandsons that it was time to leave. When the twins heard their grandfather's call, they were stunned for a moment. They could not help but mutter, "So fast." They seemed to know that they had something to do later, so they reluctantly said to the little girl, "Sister, we have to go. We'll come back tomorrow to play with you." While talking, the 2 brothers also picked up the marbles on the ground. When the little girl saw this, her face was full of reluctance. However, there was no other way. They had to leave, so she had to silently help the 2 brothers pick up the marbles. "That green one is mine." When the younger brother saw that his marble was taken away, he was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He pounced and snatched the green marble back from his older brother's hand. The little fellow squatted on the ground and silently watched them pick their marbles. She had a pitiful look on her face, as if she was very reluctant to let the 2 brothers leave. The 2 brothers put away the marbles and stood up. At this time, the elder brother seemed to have noticed the little fellow's abnormality. He hesitated for a moment, but still chose something in his pocket. After a while, the elder brother took out 2 marbles from his pocket and handed them to the little girl. "Sister, these 2 are for you." The little guy was stunned for a moment. He raised his head and glanced at his brother before hesitantly taking the marble from his hand. "And mine. I'll give you 2 as well." The younger brother was never willing to fall behind his older brother. After seeing his older brother give the marbles to the little guy, he also quickly grabbed 2 marbles and stuffed them into the little guy's hands. However, after giving away the marbles, the younger brother regretted it. Because the 2 marbles that his older brother gave were carefully selected with the ugliest patterns, but he gave the 2 prettiest ones. Although he felt a little heartache, the younger brother was still a man after all. So he knew that since he had given it away, he couldn't go back on his words. Thus, he stood together with his older brother and waved goodbye to the little guy. "Goodbye, sister. I'll come and play with you in the future. And me. I'll come and play with you too." The 2 brothers fought to be the first to say goodbye to the little guy. Seeing this, the little girl also stood up and waved her small hand that was holding the marbles at them. "Goodbye." The twins left. The little guy stood on the spot and lowered his head to look at the marbles in his hands. No one knew what he was thinking about. Qin Ruing waited quietly for a while before lightly walking over. He squatted beside the little guy and pulled him into his arms. "Ninian, your brothers gave you something. Did you say thank you to them?" Hearing this, the little guy immediately used his little hands to hug Qin Ruing's neck. After thinking for a while, she then asked in anticipation beside Qin Ruing's ear, "Mama, when will my brothers come and play with me again?" Qin Ruing smiled and didn't answer immediately. She carried the little guy to Chen Shi's side. Chen Shi took the little guy and used his hand to scratch the tip of her little nose. He then smiled and said to her, "Your brothers will come again tomorrow and play with you again. Are you happy?" "Happy." Hearing Chen Shi's words, the little guy finally broke into a smile and happily played with the marbles. Seeing this, the husband and wife both laughed. Twins were really much more fortunate than only children. The next morning, the little guy seemed to still be thinking about the two little brothers who looked exactly the same yesterday. So just after drinking a mouthful of pumpkin porridge, she couldn't wait to shout that she wanted to go to the tea house. "Nian, don't be anxious. Finish your breakfast first. It's still early now. They won't come even if you go." Qin Ruoying served the little guy breakfast while Chen Shi tidied up the room. After the family of three finished breakfast and were about to leave for the tea house, the door of the east wing suddenly opened. Qin Xueqing actually went out. She had just walked out of the door when she saw the family of three standing on the steps of the west wing, staring straight at her. Stunned for a moment, Qin Xueqing asked awkwardly, "What's wrong?" "Oh, did the sun rise from the west today?" Chen Shi said as he pretended to look at the sky. Qin Xueqing heard him say this and suddenly felt a little embarrassed. During this period of time, she and Qin Yongyan hid in the room all day to cultivate. They didn't even eat on time. Luckily, Qin Shi left food for them every day. Cultivate, eat, and sleep. They only did these three things every day. They were simply lazy. Qin Ruoying knew his sister's character very well. He was afraid that Qin Shi's joke would make her angry again, so he asked with a smile, "Are you going out?" "Yes, I just received a call from the leader. There's something I need to deal with." "Then be careful. If there's a problem, you can call us." Hearing this, Qin Xueqing couldn't help but look at Qin Ruoying, then quickly glanced at Qin Shi. Then she nodded slightly hesitantly and said, "Okay, then I'll go first." "Go ahead." After Qin Xueqing quickly walked out of the courtyard, Qin Shi looked at Qin Ruoying with a half-smile. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying asked with a smile, "If Yueqing encounters any problems as her brother-in-law, will you help?" Of course I'll help." After saying that, Chen Shi suddenly laughed, and then carried Qin Ruoying up by the waist. This sudden action immediately shocked Qin Ruoying. She quickly patted his arm and said, "Hey, what are you doing? Put me down. Let's go. Lady boss, let's open for business." Chen Shi carried Qin Ruoying by the waist, Qin Ruoying carried the little fellow, and the little fellow carried the big cat. Chapter 146. The business of the tea house was not good today, and there were no customers in the morning. The little fellow was lying on the bar, playing with the marbles that the brothers gave her. It was really boring to play marbles alone. After playing for a while, the little fellow felt a little bored, so she looked up and kept asking Qin Shi when the two little brothers from yesterday would come. The old man just said that they would come, but Qin Shi did not know when they would come. Seeing that the little fellow was about to explode, the couple thought about it, and simply took her to the corner yesterday, and then squatted on the ground to play marbles with her. 4 marbles, a family of 3. Seeing that her parents were willing to play with her, the little fellow immediately became happy. Playing marbles was actually very similar to playing billiards, and they both required certain skills. Chen Shi playing marbles was no different from opening a plug-in. In order to let the little fellow play to her heart's content, he had to deliberately miss every time. The little fellow learned the professional posture that the twins taught her, and after a tireless effort, she finally hit Qin Shi's marbles. "Papa! I won! I won!" After grabbing the marbles in front of Qin Shi, the little fellow excitedly giggled at Qin Shi. "Nian is so good, do you still want to play?" As if afraid that her father would not play with her, the little fellow quickly handed the marbles to Qin Shi. Qin Shi took the marbles, put them back on the ground, and then said to her with a smile, "Nian, Papa doesn't know how to play, you have to give in to Papa a little." "But I will give in to Papa." The little fellow nodded again and again like a chicken pecking rice. But after restarting the game, her luck was off the charts, so she hit Qin Shi's marble right away. "Oh, Nian, you are getting better and better. Papa is so stupid. I won again." The couple squatted beside the little fellow, Looking at their daughter's flushed face because of too much excitement, they could not help but reach out and pinch her little face. Annoying. Papa is annoying. Mama is so annoying. The little fellow twisted her body to avoid the attack, which made Chen-Shi and Qin-Ruoying laugh out loud. With the company of his parents, the boring morning passed quickly. The three of them had just finished lunch when the door of the tea house was pushed open. The old man came as promised. Traveling with him was naturally the twin brother that the little fellow had been looking forward to for a long time. After the short interaction yesterday, the three little guys had cultivated a deep enough friendship. So when the two brothers walked into the tea house, they immediately looked around for the little fellow. "Sister, we're here." After seeing the little fellow, the two brothers hurriedly ran out and surrounded her. Then, as if he was presenting a treasure, the elder brother took out a small car from his pocket and said to the little fellow, "Sister, look. I brought you something good." After he finished speaking, he laid on the ground and slowly pulled the trolley back. When he let go of his hand, the cart immediately moved forward. The little fellow had never played with this kind of toy before, so she immediately ran over and picked up the cart from the ground to study it. Seeing this, the younger brother grabbed the cart from the little fellow's hand and stuffed his kaleidoscope into the little fellow's hand. "Sister, look at this. This is fun." Seeing this, the elder brother immediately became unhappy. He quickly grabbed the cart back from his younger brother and said to him with dissatisfaction, "My cart is fun." As he spoke, he wanted to put the cart back into the little fellow's hand. Seeing this, the younger brother was not to be outdone and shouted to his elder brother, "The kaleidoscope is fun. The cart is fun. The kaleidoscope is fun." The little fellow held the kaleidoscope in one hand and the cart in the other. She foolishly watched the two brothers quarrel in front of her. Looking at the situation, if they were allowed to quarrel a few more words, they would probably fight. Qin-Ruoying had no choice but to step forward to stop them, and then said to the little fellow, "Nian, don't you want to play marbles? Let your elder brothers play with you." With Qin-Ruoying's mediation, the two brothers put down their dispute, squatted on the ground with the little fellow, and played the marbles that they didn't enjoy yesterday. After she made a cup of tea for the old man, he played Go with him again. Because of the old man's face, she held back a few moves, and finally lost by 3 pieces. The old man won with difficulty, but because of this, he stopped looking down on him. He just wanted to play casually before, but he didn't expect that the tea house owner was really a master at such a young age. He actually had to use all his strength to win by chance. The two of them chatted while playing Go. Through chatting, they learned that the old man's surname was Gu, and he was already 65 years old this year. He lived in Binhai Alley, which was less than 200 meters away from Dongming Alley. The twins' surname was Xia, but the old man's surname was Gu. Obviously, he was their grandfather. She casually asked about the old man's family affairs, but he didn't expect the old man to shake his head after listening. He couldn't help but sigh, "I don't want to talk about these things." Seeing this, she didn't ask more. The two of them continued to play Go. This game of Go was only interesting when the opponent was a match. If the opponent was too strong or too weak, it would be boring after 2 games. Chen-Shi's level was so much higher than the old man's that when he let the old man kill his dragon, the old man didn't notice anything strange. Instead, he proudly said that Chen-Shi was inexperienced. Chen-Shi nodded with a smile, and then invited the old man to play another game. Recently, it had been a bit gloomy. Although it didn't snow, the sun didn't come out much. Today was the worst day in history, but at the same time, it was also the happiest day for the little girl. The heater in the tea house was on full blast. Chen-Shi and the old man played Go leisurely, while the 3 little guys were chattering nonstop. Qin-Ruoying put on light music, then sat on the sofa next to them and quietly read a book. Perhaps they were tired from playing marbles, so the 3 little guys sat on the sofa to rest. Then the older brother came up with a new trick: flipping flower rope. The 2 brothers probably played it at home, so after Qin-Ruoying helped them find a rope, the 2 brothers immediately showed it to the little girl. The older brother first tied the rope into a noose, then flipped out a square cross with his fingers. When the younger brother saw this, he immediately reached over. After flipping it a few times, the noose was in his hand. Then, a double-cross pattern appeared on the younger brother's hand. At first, the little girl didn't think it was anything strange. But when she saw the younger brother casually flip and create a new pattern, her interest was finally aroused. The older brother was not to be outdone. After glancing at the double cross on the younger brother's hand, he put his thumb through it, and with a hook of his little finger, a mosquito net suddenly appeared from his hand. Amazing! The little girl stared with her eyes wide open. She didn't even dare to blink her eyes at their performance. So she immediately looked at the brothers and said with some expectation, "Can you teach me?" Hearing this, the older brother immediately took back his hand, took the rope, and handed it to the little girl. "Sister, come, I'll teach you." However, before the little girl reached out to take it, the younger brother suddenly snatched the rope from the older brother's hand, then held the rope and said to the little girl, "Sister, don't let him teach you. I'll teach you." "Give it to me. I'll teach you." "No. I'll teach you. I'll teach you. I'll teach you." Seeing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help shaking her head and laughing. Chapter 147. Gu Lao was a retired man, and his only job now was to take care of his grandchildren. The two brothers seemed to be very well behaved now, but in fact, they were much more naughty than Yin Yin. If the two brothers stayed in one place for a long time, there would probably be footprints on the ceiling. No matter where they went, the two brothers were together, so they were much bolder than the average child. If it weren't for the little girl in the tea house, they probably wouldn't have been able to sit still and would have clamored to go out and play. Gu Lao was in good health, but taking care of these two naughty boys usually tired him out. Today, it was rare that the two brothers didn't bother him, so Gu Lao was naturally happy to be free. The three of them sat in the tea house for the whole afternoon. Chen Shi patiently played Go with the old man. He controlled his level very well, and after a few games, his record became 2 wins and 3 losses. Such a well-matched match also thoroughly aroused the old man's competitive spirit, and he became more and more focused when playing Go. 4:20 in the afternoon. Not long after the 6th game started, Chen Shi's phone suddenly rang. He took out his phone and found that the caller was Ning Qiutong, who he hadn't contacted for a long time. Since Chen Shi hung up on Ning Zhonghua last time, the father and daughter of the Ning family didn't bother him again. Ning Qiutong's sudden call probably meant that she needed his help with something again. After thinking for a while, Chen Shi smiled apologetically at Gu Lao, and then picked up the phone. "Hello. Mr. Chen? It's me, Ning Qiutong." As soon as he picked up the phone, Chen Shi heard a little nervousness in Ning Qiutong's tone. The reason why Ning Zhonghua's attitude was so bad when he talked to him last time was because he couldn't find any clues about Yingying at that time, which caused him to be in a bad mood. Now that he found his wife, and the family lived happily together, Chen Shi naturally returned to his previous harmless appearance. Come to think of it, the father and daughter of the Ning family had helped him a lot in the past, although most of it was a combination of interests. However, they were sensible and knew when to advance and retreat, so Chen Shi didn't mind continuing to maintain a relationship with them. Thus, he smiled and asked, "It's me. What's the matter?" After confirming that Chen Shi was not very resistant to her, Ning Qiutong immediately said excitedly, "Mr. Chen, can you save my father?" What happened to your father?" "He was kidnapped." "What happened?" "Dad didn't come home yesterday, and I couldn't get through to him on the phone. I thought he had something important to do, so I didn't look for him. I didn't expect to suddenly receive a call from the kidnappers this morning. Did you call the police?" "Yes, the police are at my house right now. Since you've already called the police, you should listen to the police. What's the use of telling me?" After saying this, Chen Shi seemed to feel that it wasn't very nice of him to say this, so he quickly added, "You're pretty rich, right? If you can't save him, then you can use the money to solve the problem. Save him first, you can earn the money later." Hearing this, Ning Qiutong said with a sobbing tone, "The kidnappers don't want money, they only want the pills you gave Dad last time." Chen Shi frowned slightly. "Pills? Could it be the accomplices of the 2 Nanyang people last time?" While Chen Shi was still thinking, Ning Qiutong thought that Chen Shi didn't want to, so she begged, "Mr. Chen, Dad told me not to call you." Although the police have already started to act, I still feel very worried. I don't want to risk Dad's life, so I took the liberty to call you. I hope you don't mind. Okay, I understand. Hearing her terrified voice, she interrupted her and said directly, "Do you know where my house is? I still have a few pills left at home. They're on a plate under the coffee table in the living room. You can go and get them, but remember not to break the lock." "Thank you, Mr. Chin. Thank you. That's it then." After saying this, she hung up the phone. At this time, Gu Lao looked at Shi with a slightly surprised look and asked directly, "Use the money to solve the problem? Your friend was kidnapped?" Shi smiled and shook his head. He casually explained, "A friend is in debt outside, and the loan sharks came looking for him. His family is worried, so they called me." Hearing this, Gu Lao also shook his head and said emotionally, "Why would a normal person deal with loan sharks? Your friend is probably not a decent person. I'll take advantage of my seniority to give you a piece of advice. It's better if you don't deal with this kind of people in the future. Otherwise, one day you might be involved." Shi nodded and said yes. After laughing, he did not continue the topic. Seeing this, Gu Lao did not say anything more. The two continued to play Go, and Shi thought about Ning Zhonggua's incident. He really didn't expect that a mere simplified version of the foundation elixir would actually involve so many things. After Ning Zhonggua and Su Wei were warned by him last time, they had promised that they would definitely minimize the impact of the pill. However, some fires were easy to ignite, but difficult to extinguish. After all, according to the rumors, it was a miracle pill that could change one's fate. Who wouldn't want it? Ning Zhonggua and Su Wei had shot themselves in the foot. Not only did they not make much money, but they also got into trouble because of it. Thinking about it, this was the second time Ning Zhonggua was kidnapped because of the pill. However, this time he was smart. After seeing the tip of the iceberg of Shi's strength, Ning Zhonggua had already made up his mind. No matter what, he would not say anything about Shi. Instead, he insisted that the hidden expert who could refine the miracle pill had already passed away. Ning Qiutong also knew about Shi's existence. However, because of Ning Zhonggua's warning, she hesitated for a long time before finally plucking up the courage to call Shi. The kidnappers only wanted the pill and not the money. However, there were no more pills. Could it be that she had to use a fake pill in exchange for her father's life? What if the other party saw through it? This was a serious matter. Ning Qiutong did not dare to take the risk, so she thought of looking for Shi. Fortunately, Shi was much easier to deal with compared to the kidnappers. After getting Shi's permission, Ning Qiutong hurriedly rushed to the Kangju district, ready to exchange the pill for Ning Zhonggua's life. It was just a simplified version of the energy pill. Shi could have as many as he wanted, so he did not care much. Old Ning's performance this time was not bad. Those few pills were his reward. As for the kidnappers, Shi was not the police. Why would he care so much? Ning Zhonggua was a famous business tycoon in Zhonghai. Since he was kidnapped, the Zhonghai police would naturally do their best to ensure his safety. Chapter 148. Gu Lao was a very particular person. For the past 2 days, he would take the twins to the tea house after lunch every day. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Gu Lao would refuse Shi's dinner invitation and then take the reluctant twins home for dinner. A cup of vegetarian tea a day was only 20 yuan. Shi didn't accept it, but he insisted on giving it. He always said that it was a different matter. On this day, when Gu Lao took the twins to the tea house again, he suddenly found that there was a children's playground in the tea house. It turned out that the couple saw that the 3 little guys would spend most of their time lying on the ground, so after some discussion, they simply removed the row of booths on the left side of the bar. The empty space was about 7 or 8 square meters. Shi first circled the area with a plastic fence, and then covered it with colorful children's climbing mats. The twins often brought some small toys for the little guy these 2 days, which opened the little guy's eyes, but also gave her the idea of wanting her parents to buy her toys. She suddenly realized that he had not bought any toys for Nian since he came back for so long. So, he discussed with Qin Ruing to buy a lot of things in Jingdong. Within the third ring road of Shangjing, the Jingdong delivery would arrive the next morning. Chen she bought a set of Barbie dolls for the little guy and 2 or 3 sets of accessories for her. Fantasy wardrobes, villas, castles, holiday homes, everything was available. Maybe Nian Nian had a talent for music? A children's electronic organ was needed. Maybe Nian Nian had a talent for painting? Children's paintbrushes, crayons, watercolors, and a painting kit were needed. Nian Nian lacked companionship, so a children's intelligent robot toy was needed. There was also a set of Lego bricks, puzzle toys, good stuff. The couple was addicted to buying. You choose one, I choose one. When Qin Ruoying came back to her senses, the settlement price of the shopping cart had reached more than 8,000 yuan. This was not good. How many toys to buy for the child was a very particular thing. After research by scholars at the University of Virginia, they found that the best number of toys to buy for the child was 5. If there are less than 5 toys, children may feel inferior. But if there were more than 5, not only would the toys not be played enough, but it would also limit the child's creativity. It was also proven that the more toys there were at home, the lower the frequency of children playing with them. Too many toys would distract a child's attention, and it was easy for the child to develop the bad habit of 3-minute enthusiasm. On the other hand, if the number of toys was small, the child would get tired of playing with them. At the same time, if they couldn't get new toys, the bored child would create new ways to play. This was human nature, just like how primitive people created songs and dances out of boredom after eating and sleeping. Therefore, children who liked to study were often more intelligent. At the same time, because they had fewer toys, they were more focused. Of course, it was also wrong not to buy a toy for the child. All the other children had toys, but he didn't. While children envied others, they would also develop feelings of inferiority, which would seriously affect the child's mental health. The number of 5 toys was not an absolute standard. After all, every child was different, so the real effective standard still needed the parents to observe and figure it out. After Qin Ruoying's reminder, Chen Shi had to sift through the shopping cart regretfully. In the end, there were only Barbie dolls, Lego bricks, and an electronic piano left. When the twins came to the tea house, the little girl was lying in the children's playground, piling up Lego bricks. Because of the new toys, she didn't ask for a brother today. When the brothers saw the children's playground that Chen Shi had carefully decorated, they immediately ran to the fence and said to the little girl with envy, "Sister, can we come in and play?" But Mommy said that we have to take off our shoes when we come in to play. Okay, we'll take it off. Hearing this, the brothers quickly kicked off the shoes on their feet and couldn't wait to open the fence door. After getting in, they directly lay next to the little girl and played with her with Lego bricks. The 3 little guys made a lot of noise in the tea house, so Qin Ruoying played light music to cover up their chattering noise. Recently, the tea house's business had been declining day by day. It was probably directly related to these 3 little guys. If this trend continued, it was estimated that the tea house would become a children's playground sooner or later. Qin Ruoying sat at the bar, reading a book and drinking tea. The giggles of the 3 little guys from time to time made her smile faintly. Looking up at her lover who was playing chess with Gu Lao, Qin Ruoying felt like she was in a dream. Wasn't this kind of peaceful and comfortable life what she had always dreamed of? Qin Ruoying sat behind the bar in a daze, her face full of happiness. But at this moment, a melodious ringtone suddenly rang out. It was her cell phone that was ringing. She got this cell phone after returning to Shangjing. Only the 3 of them in her family knew her number. Qin Ruoying quickly picked it up and took a look. Sure enough, the caller was Qin Yongyan. The call was connected. But the first sentence from Qin Yongyan shocked Qin Ruoying. "Yingying Qingqing is injured. What happened to her?" It said that she was ambushed and shot in the arm with a sniper rifle. If she didn't dodge quickly, she would be a dead person now. But even so, one of her hands is considered disabled. Qin Ruoying was stunned. Holding the cell phone, she froze in place. At this time, after Chen Shi excused himself from Gu Lao, he got up and went to the bar. He had already heard the conversation between the father and daughter. He patted Qin Ruoying's back gently, indicating that she should not worry. Chen Shi took the phone from Qin Ruoying and asked Qin Yongyan, "Where is she now?" "In Dianzhou." "I'll be right there." But hearing Qin Shi's words, Qin Yongyan immediately felt relieved. After telling Qin Shi the specific location, he hung up the phone. Chen Shi was very clear about his sister-in-law's strength. When she left a few days ago, she had successfully broken through the Alcade state. But unexpectedly, she was lucky enough to survive because of this. The reason why martial arts declined was that human society had completely entered the era of firearms. Even a child as old as Nian Nian could easily kill a martial arts master who had practiced martial arts for many years with a gun. The bullet speed of a sniper rifle was generally about 900 meters per second, and the speed of sound was only 340 meters per second. This speed was 2.5 times faster than the speed of sound. If Qin Wanqing was still in the transforming strength stage, she wouldn't have been able to dodge this fatal shot. She was indeed lucky. Chapter 149. Something had happened to Qin Xueqing. But it was Qin Yongyan who had called to inform them. In other words, Qin Xueqing was probably not out of danger yet. Qin Ruoying only had one sister. Although Qin Xueqing especially liked to compete with her when she was young, it was just a childish tantrum. It was obviously impossible to say that the two sisters had no feelings for each other. Qin Xueqing actually cared about her sister very much, just like how Qin Ruoying cared about her. It was just that she always appeared cold and aloof. Qin Ruoying was not very sure what would happen if she was shot in the arm by a sniper rifle. But Qin Yongyan had already said on the phone that one of Qinqing's hands was crippled. She was originally a martial arts fanatic. If one of her hands was really crippled, what kind of blow would it be to her? The more Qin Ruoying thought about it, the more afraid she became. She could not help but hold Chen Shi's hand tightly, looking a little frightened. Seeing this, Chen Shi gently hugged her into his arms and comforted her softly. "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Qin Ruoying gently leaned her head on Chen Shi's chest. After adjusting her emotions, she said softly, "Shi, go and see Qin, okay?" Chen Shi nodded, then lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruoying's lips. Perhaps because Chen Shi was by her side, Qin Ruoying could not help but feel a little more relaxed after their lips parted. The couple turned their heads to the left side of the bar. The three little guys were sitting on the climbing mat, with a pile of Lego blocks in front of each of them. They were comparing whose block castle looked better. "Nian Nian, Daddy has to go out for a while. I'll be back soon. Be good at home and listen to Mommy, okay?" Chen Shi's tone was full of negotiation because he was worried that the little guy would suddenly flip out. However, the little fellow's reaction was somewhat out of Chen Shi's expectations. She looked up at Chen Shi. After thinking for a while, the little girl suddenly grinned and said, "Goodbye, Papa. I'll wait for you at home." As she spoke, she waved her hand at Chen Shi. At this moment, the twins waved at Chen Shi and shouted, "Goodbye, Uncle." Seeing this, Chen Shi was stunned for a moment. Then he patted the heads of the three little guys one by one. The little fellow suddenly stopped clinging to him. It probably had something to do with these two brothers. Chen Shi didn't know that the two brothers were brought up by Gu Lao. Their parents were very busy with work, so they rarely accompanied them when they were young. After the brothers explained their situation to the little fellow finally understood how happy she was now. Therefore, when Chen Shi proposed to go out, Nian Nian was very generous. Because she now understood that adults need to go out to work, so they can't be with their children all day. The little fellow was very generous, which relieved Chen Shi of his worries. After briefly explaining the situation to Gu Lao, Qin Ruoying followed Chen Shi to the courtyard behind the tea house. "I'm here, don't worry." "Well, after you understand the situation, remember to give me a call, okay?" Chen Shi reached out and gently touched Qin Ruoying's face. After taking her into his arms and kissing her again, he smiled and said, "Let's go." Then, under Qin Ruoying's gaze, Chen Shi disappeared in the air in an instant. After sighing softly, Qin Ruoying turned and returned to the tea house. Spring City. What was Spring City? There was no cold in winter, no hot in summer, and spring all year round. Spring City was the provincial capital of Dianzhou. It was one of the important central cities in the western region of Huaxia. At the same time, it was also the gateway city to Southeast Asia and South Asia. Spring City was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and Dianqi Lake on the south. Because it was located in a low-latitude plateau, it formed a unique climate of spring all year round. Especially with the plateau Lake Dianqi Lake regulating the temperature and humidity, the annual average temperature here was always maintained around 16.5 degrees Celsius. The air was really fresh and the climate was pleasant. As a second-tier city, Spring City was naturally not as prosperous as Zhonghai or as grand as Shangjing. But there was one thing that Spring City was better than these two cities. That was, there was no smog. Of course, the high altitude in exchange for spring all year round came at the price of low humidity. After living for a long time, people's skin would become very dry. But for people with rheumatoid diseases, this was simply a holy land for health. Rong City Military District, Spring City General Hospital. Senior Officials Ward. The senior officials ward here was not as high-end as the 301 hospital in Shangjing, but it had the advantage of having a high floor and a good environment. There were wardrobes, fridges, washrooms, and bathrooms. The area was not big, but it had everything. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Xueqing was still in shock. As a newly promoted martial arts grandmaster, her physique was indeed better than ordinary people. After the heavy sniper rifle locked on, she could still sense the danger and dodge in time while being restrained by others. However, although she dodged the fatal shot, her entire right hand was disabled because of it. Because of the appearance of various supernatural dramas in recent years, many people mistakenly thought that after being shot in the head by a sniper rifle, it would only leave a small hole in the forehead. But in reality, if someone was really shot in the head by a sniper rifle, their head would explode like a big watermelon, and they would become a headless corpse in an instant. The so-called heavy sniper rifle was actually a 50 anti-material sniper rifle. The main targets of this type of rifle were armored vehicles, airplanes, and fortifications. Its advantages were its long range, high power, and high accuracy. Its disadvantages were that there was usually only one bullet in the magazine, and it took a long time to reload. If one was directly hit by this type of rifle, if one was lucky, it might only break in two. But if one was unlucky, it might be all over the place. There was no way to collect the corpse. Qin Xueqing's arm was broken on the spot. Fortunately, she was not an ordinary person. Otherwise, when her entire arm was broken, her shoulder blade might be pulled and a part of her body would be forcibly torn off. This was the true power of modern weapons. Because of excessive blood loss, Qin Xueqing was still in a coma. A group of people stood outside her ward. They had been waiting here for a whole day and night, but Qin Xueqing still did not wake up. A man who looked to be in his 30s stood up and glanced at Qin Wanqing, who was lying on the hospital bed through the glass window. He seemed to have made a decision as he turned around and walked out with an ashen face. "Third brother. Where are you going?" Before the man called third brother could take 2 steps, he was pulled back by his companion behind him. He did not say a word and wanted to shake off his companion, but his companion grabbed his arm tightly and did not allow him to leave. The two of them started arguing. The people around them hurriedly surrounded them and tried to persuade them to calm down. While they were arguing, the elevator door opened with a ding sound. A man slowly walked out of the elevator. He stood in the corridor and looked around. After confirming the room number, he walked directly to the senior officials' ward where they were. Third brother was in a fit of anger. When he saw that the man was being so rude, he immediately reached out his hand to stop him. "Stop. Who the F***ck are you? Do you know where this place is?" The man glanced at him, then pointed to the ward behind him and asked, "Is Qin Xueqing here? Who the F***ck are you?" Third brother's attitude was very bad, so the man did not want to talk to him. After glancing at him indifferently, he wanted to walk past him and go straight to the ward. Third brother was instantly furious. He reached out his hand to drag the man back. However, before his hand could touch the man's clothes, a huge force slammed him against the wall. Chapter 150. Brother-in-law? The people outside the ward could not help but look at each other when they heard this. After saying that, Qin didn't bother to pay attention to them anymore. She walked past them and entered the ward. No one dared to stop him. This was because Lao San had been slapped into the wall by him. Just this move alone was enough to intimidate them. Everyone knew their stuff because they knew Lao San's martial arts level very well. He was at the peak of covert strength. He could send a warrior at the peak of covert strength flying with a casual slap. This young man in front of them was at least a Wu Dao Supreme Master. The few people outside the ward pondered over his self-revealing identity for a while and were skeptical about it for the time being. However, Lao San did not believe it. After Qin pushed him back, Lao San immediately took out a pistol from his waist and roared at the others with a red face. F***CK, you don't even know who this person is. How dare you let him in? After that, he rushed into the ward aggressively with a gun. In the ward, Qin Xueqing was lying on the bed with a pale face. Seeing his proud sister-in-law suddenly lying on the bed, she could not help but frown slightly. Just as he was about to approach the bed, Lao San rushed in with a gun. Stop right there. Please. Get out. Before he could finish his words, she had already turned sideways and glared at him. Then he spat out a word coldly. Before Qin Xueqing reached the gang state, she could only let Qin do whatever he wanted to her, let alone Lao San, who had not even reached the peak strength stage. Therefore, Qin did not do anything. Lao San's chest suddenly felt like he was hit by a hammer. His whole body immediately flew out. Qin did not hurt him. After he flew out of the ward, he closed the door behind him. Lao San's companions outside the door quickly caught him and prevented him from falling to the ground. Seeing this, the companion who had just argued with Old Third could not help but blurt out, using qi to control objects, a great grandmaster in the gang state. Hearing this, the expressions of the people outside the door changed drastically. Gang state? So young. Is he really the brother-in-law of the section chief? That should be it. He looks a few years younger than me. I didn't expect him to already be a great grandmaster. A great grandmaster in the gang state was a legendary existence for people who had been practicing martial arts since childhood. Qin Xueqing had just broken through to the Alcade state and had not had time to stabilize her state, so she did not tell them that she had already stepped into the Alcade state. Old Third finally calmed down a lot after being hit by such a heavy blow. When he stood up again with the help of his companions, he didn't try to chase them away. Instead, he squeezed to the glass window and looked at the situation in the room. This was the Chengdu Military Region's Spring City General Hospital. No matter how bold those Nanyang monkeys were, it was unlikely that they would come here to cause trouble. The reason why OL-3 stopped Qin from entering was because he was in a bad mood. He wanted to vent his anger on someone, but he did not expect to bump into an iron plate. At this time, Qin was already standing next to Qin Xueqing. He lifted a corner of Qin Xueqing's blanket and looked at her empty sleeve with a frown. Then he gently placed his right hand on Qin Xueqing's forehead. 3 seconds later, Qin slowly withdrew his right hand, and Qin Xueqing slowly woke up. The section chief is awake. Damn. That's awesome. Let's go in and have a look. They pushed and shoved outside the door, but they found that they could not get in. The door seemed to be locked from the inside. Qin Xueqing's head shook left and right, followed by a painful groan. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Perhaps it was because the light was too dazzling, so Qin Xueqing frowned and took a while to adjust to it. Then she slowly opened her eyes. After all, she was a great master in the gang state, and her body was much stronger than ordinary people. After a short period of adjustment, Qin Xueqing used her left hand to support herself to sit up. The ward was filled with the faint smell of disinfectant. This was the 13th floor, and the bright morning sun shone into the room through the window. In a trance, Qin Xueqing vaguely remembered that she had a very long dream. That dream was too long. So when she woke up, she felt as if she had gone from a cold winter full of snow to a warm spring full of the fragrance of flowers. Sensing that there was someone beside her, Qin Shueqing turned to look at the figure and was slightly stunned. After a long while, she asked in a hoarse voice, "Why are you here? Where is this?" "Spring City, Military Hospital." "Hospital?" Qin Shueqing muttered. Immediately after, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly turned her head to look at her right arm. Sure enough, the empty sleeve was swaying slightly. The memory before she fainted flashed in her mind like a slideshow. She remembered. She, who had already stepped into the gang state, was like a real god in front of those Nanyang monkeys, and they were forced to retreat. She even remembered the despair on those Nanyang people's faces. The leader of those Nanyang people was also a martial arts master. When she fought with them, they pretended to be defeated and lured her to chase after them. As a martial artist, Qin Shueqing had her own confidence and pride. So she subconsciously thought that every martial arts master should have their own pride. She really didn't expect that the other party had already arranged a sniper and was just waiting for her to take the bait. Qin Shueqing's hard work during this period of time was not wasted. Although She didn't teach her any spells, after being shot, she still relied on her instincts and decisively released all of the true essence in her body to force the enemy back. She also fought for a chance of survival for herself, holding on until reinforcements arrived. She survived, and her broken arm was brought back by her companions. But unfortunately, she was shot in the upper arm, and the bullet immediately turned her upper arm into minced meat. With this degree of injury, there was no way to perform a limb replantation surgery, so the doctor could only amputate her arm. Now that she lost her right arm, she was considered a disabled person, right? Not to mention that she was also a martial arts master. Even if an ordinary person suddenly became disabled, they probably wouldn't be able to accept this fact in a short period of time. A one-armed knife, that was a scene that only appeared in movies and TV series. If a martial artist didn't even have a complete body, how could they talk about martial arts? Although she could defeat a normal neutralizing master with one hand, what if the other party was in the same realm as her? Thinking of this, Qin Shueqing's face couldn't help but darken. She seemed to have lost her luster. Because she had lost too much blood, her face was a little pale, and her lips were slightly chapped. It seemed that she didn't want Shi to see her weak and helpless appearance. After a trace of pain flashed across Qin Shueqing's face, she acted as usual and said coldly, "You go back first. I want to rest for a while." After saying this, she lay back on the bed. She stood to her left. After lying down, she found that Shi was still looking at her, so she turned to her right. Her right arm was already missing. With her body pressed down, the wound suddenly burst open, and blood instantly seeped out of the gauze. Qin Shueqing let out a soft groan. Then, she used her left hand to grab the quilt and pull it up, covering her head with it. "I want to sleep. Please leave." Qin Shueqing hid under the quilt and said in a muffled voice. But at the same time, 2 streams of hot tears quietly fell from his eyes. She turned sideways, stretched her head forward, and tried to wipe the tears on her face with the quilt. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. She was Qin Shueqing, a martial arts great master who had stepped into the gang state before the age of 30. She stood aside, quietly looking at his sister-in-law who was hiding under the quilt and quietly crying. He couldn't help but sigh slightly. After all, she was just a little woman. After sighing, she made a new move. However, this move was a little rough. Because he directly lifted Qin Shueqing's quilt. Qin Shueqing was lying on the bed. It seemed that she didn't expect that Shi would dare to lift her quilt, so she was stunned on the spot. After the quilt fell to the ground, Qin Shueqing came to her senses. "What are you doing? Are you trying to mock me? Or are you pitying me?" She sat up and roared at Shi, but there was still a trace of tears on her face that hadn't dried yet. Shi didn't say anything. The two of them looked at each other silently. Qin Shueqing didn't see sarcasm or pity in Shi's eyes, but calmness. It was as calm as a lake deep in the mountains, without any emotion. She saw despair and pain in Qin Shueqing's eyes. This broken arm made her finally understand what despair was, after a long time. She finally broke the silence. She did not understand what she wanted to say. But at this time, Qin Xueqing had already turned her head and looked to the other side. She glanced at the closet next to her and then directly walked out of the bed. "You go out first. I want to change my clothes." "Okay, I'll wait for you outside." Seeing that she seemed to be much better, she did not waste any more time and directly walked out of the ward. Outside the ward, those people were still blocking the door and eavesdropping. When they saw Shi coming over, they scattered like birds and beasts. Shi opened the door. Those people were already sitting or standing in positions. There were a total of 4 men and 1 woman here. They were all Qin Xueqing's subordinates. What did Qin Xueqing do? She was a direct subordinate of the Wu Lian headquarters in Shangjing. She was the director of the Emergency Operations Management Office for special events. She was a section chief, so everyone called her Section Chief Qin. The Wu Lian was an administrative unit, so naturally, it used the administrative rank. Her position as a section chief did not seem high, but she had special rights. One of them was that it was not illegal to kill people. When the Wu Lian's department was on a mission in another country, they had the right to request the local police to cooperate with the operation. If the situation was special, they could even apply to the higher-ups for local armed police and military support. Qin Xueqing's Emergency Management Office had 10 action teams under its jurisdiction. With Shangjing as the center, they were responsible for combating all martial artist-related criminal activities in North China. This time, the reason why she came to Spring City was because of the special mission. It was a group of martial artists who illegally came from Nanyang. They planned a shocking kidnapping in Zhonghai, which shocked the entire international Wu Lian. Their timing was very clever. After most of the people in the Zhonghai branch were transferred to Jinling for another mission, they began the operation and directly kidnapped 2 well-known business moguls in Zhonghai. The social impact of this operation was too great. The Zhonghai branch did not have enough time to transfer people from Jinling, so they had to send an emergency request to the headquarters. After the headquarters in Shangjing received the request, they immediately sent out reinforcements. Qin Xueqing was one of the main people in charge of this rescue mission. After they set off from Shangjing and arrived in Zhonghai, they found that the group of Nanyang people had already gone deep into the hinterland of Huaxia. This group of people was also very brave. After they knew that the military would take over the sea and the air defense, they simply chose to travel by land. They crossed East China, Central China, and South China, planning to return to Nanyang from Guizhou. They had hostages in their hands. All of them were highly skilled in martial arts and were armed with heavy weapons. Due to various considerations, the local police did not dare to obstruct them. They set up checkpoints along the way, but they let them pass. From East China to the border of South China, it was more than 2,000 kilometers. This group of people only took 1 day and 1 night to complete the entire journey. This could already be considered a terrorist activity. In a fit of anger, the Wu Lian leader ordered the action team to set up layers of defense on the border of Guizhou with the Border Defense Army. Even if the hostages were hurt, it was absolutely impossible to let them leave Huaxia unscathed. Qin Xueqing led the team to intercept them in Guizhou. After a short exchange with that group of people, they retreated after 1 strike and turned to jump into Shirwan Mountains. Shirwan Mountains was located in the southern part of Guizhou. It faced the sea and was adjacent to Yuebei. The mountains were filled with towering trees, and there were few roads and few people. Qin Xueqing originally thought that they would find an opportunity to cross the border from Shirwan Mountains and escape to Yuebei, so she launched a search operation in Shirwan Mountains. She did not know that this group of people did not intend to leave through Shirwan Mountains at all. Instead, they turned again and went directly to Dianzhou. With the obstruction of Shirwan Mountains, they successfully shook off the Border Defense Army. However, the weakest under Qin Xueqing's command was at the middle stage of concealing strength. How could she let them escape under her nose? Therefore, she immediately followed them and chased them all the way. Finally, on the border of Dianzhou, Qin Xueqing stopped this group of people again. This time, the other party finally started a direct confrontation with them. Qin Xueqing did not dare to use heavy weapons, but the other party was not polite at all. They carried rocket launchers on their shoulders and only fired them in places where there were many people. They seemed to be escaping from the beginning to the end, but in fact, all of the Wu Lian's actions were within the expectations of this group of people. Their destination was Dianzhou. After Qin Xueqing was injured, the emergency department suddenly lost its backbone. Without the obstruction of the martial arts masters, this group of people rushed across the border. Instead, he chose an extremely clumsy method, and that was to directly inject his vital essence into Qin Xueqing's body. His sister-in-law was now considered an immortal cultivator, so after Qin Shi's vital essence entered her body, he could circulate the Dharma art without any hindrance. It seemed like he was flying with Qin Xueqing, but in fact, the two of them were flying separately. However, Qin Xueqing didn't know this. Feeling the constant warmth from Qin Shi's hand, she actually blushed for the first time. Because she was worried that Qin Shi would notice her strange behavior, Qin Xueqing quickly turned her head to look in another direction. She didn't even hear Qin Shi talking to her. "I'm asking you a question. Where are those people?" Qin Shi thought she was frightened, so he patiently asked twice. It wasn't until the third time that Qin Xueqing finally came back to her senses. She quickly answered, "Southwest, south of Wen Mountain. It's about 180 kilometers away from Spring City." "Okay." Qin Shi looked in the direction. After confirming that it was correct, he directly flew over with Qin Xueqing. Qin Xueqing secretly glanced at Qin Shi's side profile from the corner of her eye. When they passed by the sentry post, because they moved too quickly, the monitors didn't notice what happened there. Now that Qin Xueqing was standing at the entrance of the base, this move immediately attracted the attention of the monitors. Looking at the soldier who was casually thrown to the ground, the monitors immediately sounded the alarm. The shrill alarm suddenly rang over the village. At this moment, the entire base seemed to come alive, and countless soldiers rushed out from all corners of the base with guns. Even the soldiers who were still training on the training ground immediately stopped their training, and under the command of the instructor, they instantly entered combat mode. Looking at Qin Xueqing, who stirred up the hornet's nest, Qin Shi couldn't help but feel speechless. He originally thought that Qin Xueqing would sneak in, blow up a few houses to distract the enemy, and then take action. He didn't expect that she would attack the door in such a simple and crude way. This style of doing things was somewhat similar to his style. When Qin Xueqing heard the sudden sound of the alarm, she was also shocked. She carefully looked around and made sure that no one else was watching before she made her move, but she forgot that there was a monitoring system here. After cursing herself a few times with some annoyance, Qin Xueqing quickly jumped into the sentry post next to her. She really wasn't cut out for assassination and sneak attacks. The sentry post at the entrance of the base was not like the previous sentry tower. It was a square reinforced concrete building, 2 stories high, and the walls were thicker, which served as both a sentry post and a defense function. There were 3 soldiers in the sentry post. After hearing the alarm, one of them was ready to go out to check the situation, but he didn't expect to run into Qin Shueqing, who rushed into the sentry post. Almost without any reaction, he fell to the ground silently. A master could kill people within 10 steps like killing chickens. When Qin Shueqing sneaked up to the second floor, the other 2 soldiers were still observing the situation on the second floor. They saw Qin Shi leisurely riding a horse in front of them. When they were about to shoot the stranger in front of them, Qin Shueqing had already twisted their necks from behind. After the monitor explained the enemy's situation and location through the broadcast, the soldiers all rushed toward the sentry post. After all, they were not a regular army, but the private armed forces of the drug lords, so they didn't have high discipline. When they heard that the enemy had invaded, they swarmed over. Qin Shueqing sneaked a glance at the situation below. There were at least 200 to 300 people, and they were all fully armed soldiers. The black barrel trembled slightly. The child seemed to be very afraid. Seeing this, Qin Shueqing could not help but be stunned. But in the moment when she was distracted, the child suddenly opened fire. Da-da-da! The muzzle of the gun spat out tongues of fire. There was no fear on the child's face. There was only excitement and fanaticism. The recoil of the AK-47 was well known. However, because the child had been practicing for a long time, his hands were very steady. He stood on the stairs on the second floor as if he had gone crazy. He laughed wildly as he sprayed bullets downwards. The bullets swept the table, the windows, the furniture, and instantly tore everything into pieces. The 30 bullets were quickly used up. When the child put down the gun and looked at his masterpiece proudly, he suddenly realized that although it was a mess downstairs, the 2 people stood there without moving at all. After sighing softly, Chen Shi turned his head and said to Qin Shueqing helplessly, "The bullets fired from the gun of a 14-year-old child are as deadly as the bullets fired from the gun of a 40-year-old man, maybe even more deadly." Qin Shueqing heard this sentence before. It was from the King of War. However, when this scene happened in front of her eyes, she couldn't help but feel very complicated. Chen Shi did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the bullets that stopped in front of them all turned around and then shot at the child on the stairs at a faster speed. The body was a child, but the heart was a demon, so, can't stay. Originally, Chen Shi came with the mentality of avenging his sister-in-law, but after being disturbed by this child, even he began to feel a little uncomfortable. The child was not wrong. It was the world that was wrong. Even a teenager was trained to be a demon that killed without batting an eyelid. This kind of behavior had completely infuriated him. After frowning and glancing at the stairs, Chen Shi suddenly seemed to have noticed something. He quickly looked back at the door of the villa. Qin Shueqing saw his actions. While she was confused, Chen Shi's figure had already disappeared from the hall. Almost at the same time, he was outside the villa. Qin Ruoing immediately rolled her eyes at him. At this time, the little girl also looked up and saw Chen Shi. "Papa, you're back." With a clear sound of "Papa," the little girl let go of Qin Ruoing's hand, waved her arms and ran toward Chen Shi. Chen Shi quickly squatted down and held the little girl in his arms. After Chen Shi stood up with her in his arms, the little girl sat in Chen Shi's arms and handed the Barbie doll to Chen Shi. She pouted and said coquettishly, "Papa, dolls are not fun." Looking at the Barbie doll that was twisted like a fried dough twist, Chen Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He quickly comforted her, "You can't play with Barbie dolls like this. Papa will teach you later, okay?" But the little girl nodded happily. In fact, she didn't care much about what she played. She cared more about who would play with her. Qin Ruing came over, and Chen Shi quickly freed his left hand to hold her hand. "Where's Yuan Qing?" "She's in Spring City. She'll be back tomorrow." "Is she all right?" "She's fine. It's just a broken hand. She'll recover when she reaches the gold core stage." "How long will it take?" "With her diligence, I don't think it'll take long." "That's true. I want to eat braised lion's head." A noise suddenly came from the middle, interrupting the couple's conversation. It turned out that the little girl was a little unhappy because they kept talking and neglected her. "Okay, Papa will make it for you. What else do you want to eat?" "Kung Pao chicken." "Hey, what else?" "Pork ribs, sweet and sour pork ribs." "Okay, Papa will make it for you. Papa is the best." "What about Mommy?" "Mommy is good too." You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.